Make France great again. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 26, Peace-Loving Rothschild. Yeah. Jerome Bonaparte nodded, sighed inwardly, and his expression gradually became solemn. I also heard about my cousin's loan at the Rothschild Bank. Is it finally a showdown? Enemy or friend? Jerome Bonaparte's body was slightly tense, and his attention was also highly concentrated. He was in a state of fighting at any time, for fear of falling into a trap in the next game. Of course, the subtle change in Jerome Bonaparte's expression did not escape the eyes of that old and sly Lionel Rothschild, pointer-prudent prince who looks difficult to deal with. Lionel Rothschild silently commented on Jerome. His face still had a professional smile on his face, and lightly comforted. Your Excellency, please don't worry, that I'm not here to collect debts of. Rothschild paused for a while, and then said, furthermore, the demand collateral that my cousin has placed with me is actually enough for him to repay the loan he borrowed from Rothschild. The fact that Lionel Rothschild generously forgave Louis Napoleon's loan from the Rothschild family did not make Jerome Bonaparte feel the same kind of gratitude, but more it is the vigilance of Lionel Rothschild. A shrewd banker will not forgive the borrower's debts generously. They will only use their financial means to squeeze the last in the borrower's pocket francs, making it bankrupt point, unless the borrower has much more value than the debt itself. Lending to people of value and need is what a qualified banker should do. Point. Just like why some banks and later generations would not easily lend to those small and medium-sized industrial companies, but would instead lend to those real estate companies thinking of the law. Even if the government repeatedly emphasized that hot money should not be poured into the real estate market, there are still a large group of people disregard laws and change laws and pour hot money into real estate through other channels. It is not because the economic value of real estate is much more stable than other real industries. The demand for houses makes banks not worry about the situation that the house cannot be sold, even when some real estate developers are about to go bankrupt. In order to prevent the bankruptcy of trillions of real estate and the shock caused, the government has to hold its nose and introduce stable policies that it believes to ensure that there will be no large-scale avalanche incidents in the market. Even a layman like Jerome Bonaparte would understand such a simple question, and Lionel Rothschild would not fail to understand it. Now Jerome Bonaparte has to say thank you to Lionel Rothschild Bank. Your Majesty, you should know the history of our Rothschild family. Lionel Rothschild said. Of course, the Rothschild family was the beneficiary of that revolution as the Bonaparte family. Jerome Bonaparte responded. That's right. That revolution, what a great revolution. Lionel Rothschild sighed with emotion in his eyes. For the revolution that the nobles called the dark history, Lionel's heart was full of gratitude. If it weren't for that revolution's own ancestor, I'm afraid he could only be an antique dealer all his life. Point. In his lifetime, he could only marry a German petty aristocrat who was about to go bankrupt. The next generation's name could have an extra feng character. I'm afraid that my generation can only try their best to squeeze into the so-called high society circle, which is like, now that I only need to hook up, and I will receive countless olive branches from the high society. Point. Although their purpose was just to borrow more money from the Rothschild family, how could he at least enjoy the feeling of standing out from the crowd? Ah, a great revolution. Jerome Bonaparte, the beneficiary, also echoed. Of course, we also have a time for Waterloo. Lionel Rothschild changed the subject and said, the great emperor's Battle of Waterloo caused heavy losses to the family. Since then, the family has begun to consider avoiding wars as much as possible. Jerome Bonaparte looked suspiciously at Lionel Rothschild. He suddenly remembered that a certain book said that the Rothschild family had suffered heavy losses in Waterloo. The reliability of those things is still relatively high. Point. Having said that, the Rothschild family is now. Jerome Bonaparte recalls the history of the Rothschild family. Your Majesty, don't look at me like that. Lionel Rothschild spread his hands and said, no country is more peace-loving than Rothschild, and any country is attacked by the Rothschild family lost heavily. Unlike in the late 18th century, Rothschild in the mid-19th century had stalls spread over more than half of Europe. Once Europe is in turmoil, it will inevitably affect their business in Europe. Finance is strong and fragile. Riyadh 1.com. Its strength lies in the fact that it can raise a huge amount of cash to arm the army in a very short period of time, and its vulnerability because it does not have the ability to actually control the army. Dictators can use the opportunity of war to rectify a legal financial element, especially Jews like them. Jerome Bonaparte's face twitched slightly. It was too ironic to be able to get the words "he loves peace" from a warmonger. So, Your Excellency, the Baron wants to cooperate with the Bonaparte family? Jerome Bonaparte asked the question that had been brewing in his heart for a long time. No, no, no. Lionel Rothschild shook the spoon in his hand and said, "The Rothschild family will not openly stand with any forces, nor will they cooperate with any forces. We will only do our best to provide the best quality financial services to our customers." Lionel Rothschild deliberately emphasized his tone. "So, you are also cooperating with the current government of the Republic?" Jerome Bonaparte said to Lionel Rothschild with a hint of ridicule. "Of course." Lionel Rothschild gritted his teeth with a trace of resentment in his eyes. Back then, the family should not have listened to the advice of their uncle, James Rothschild, and placed bets on those rebels. Now that the group of guys has come up, the family has suffered heavy losses. Note 1. Trust me, your investment will not disappoint, Rothschild. PS. 1. After the February Revolution, there were a lot of bank runs in France. The Rothschild Bank, as the first bank in this run, lost a lot of cash until the Republic government issued a decree to order the banks not to exchange money. After that, Rothschild's branch in France stopped the loss. Chapter 27. First angel investor. No, not the entire Rothschild family. Lionel Rothschild smiled and shook his head and added in a flat tone, "It's me, Lionel Rothschild, who wants to make a private investment in you, His Excellency the Prince. This investment is only for the two of us personal." Lionel Rothschild deliberately accentuated the tone of "we two," where, as if to remind Jerome Bonaparte that there is no support from the French branch behind this investment. Jerome Bonaparte was keenly aware that there was something in Lionel Rothschild's words. An intriguing smile, with a hint of a joke in his tone. "Don't the Rothschild family like me?" Lionel Rothschild shrugged his shoulders and spread his hands, and said helplessly, "To be honest, Uncle James in France doesn't like you," referring to the Bonaparte family. Until now, he is still fantasizing about the day when the young Bourbon branch, to be able to return to the throne. James Rothschild, the second generation core member of the Rothschild family, after the death of Nathan Rothschild, the core of the power of the entire Rothschild family was in the hands of James Rothschild. 1856. After the death of Hannah Rothschild, Nathan Rothschild's wife, Rothschild split the European business. Lionel Rothschild's father was Nathan Rothschild. Speaking of James Rothschild's Lionel Rothschild, a cold smile appeared on the corner of his. "My uncle is old. How did he know that Louis Philippe, who was abandoned by the Paris mob, would never come back? It's gone." Afterwards, he paused for a moment and said to himself, "No, he should know this. It's just that he doesn't want to face it." Jerome Bonaparte watched Lionel Rothschild's personal performance quietly. From Lionel Rothschild's words and eyes, it can be seen that Lionel Rothschild, the relationship between Rothschild and his uncle James Rothschild does not seem so harmonious, with a feeling of filial piety to the uncle, kindness and nephew, unlike some later generations who forcibly fabricated Rothschild in order to advocate abroad the atmosphere of unity of the D family. Of course, Jerome Bonaparte could understand the emotions of Lionel Rothschild. If a family is not united by infighting, it is truly a miracle in the world, especially a family that has mastered huge capital like this. The core of clan infighting is to form competition with each other, not to tear down each other. A qualified clan will control the infighting to a basic limit and cannot make the clan collapse in the infighting. From the perspective of a latecomer, Jerome agreed with limited internal competition, and competition without a bottom line must be banned. "So you want to prove to your uncle your vision?" Jerome Bonaparte asked Lionel Rothschild. "That's right." Lionel Rothschild nodded in agreement with Jerome Bonaparte's question. He clenched his fists and tapped the table lightly and said with a slightly grim expression, "Older lifetime, you should obediently hide at home. and take care of your life. Why should you come out and compete with young people for a position? The Rothschild family's business thinking and business philosophy must be reformed. You don't seem to have replaced your uncle James Rothschild in history. Jerome Bonaparte silently complained in his heart. After James Rothschild took over as head of the Rothschild family, he was the de facto controller of the French Rothschild family bank until his death in 1868. Lionel Rothschild's rebellion was clearly a failure. However, Lionel Rothschild's leadership in Britain was not lost because of rebellion, and from this point of view, this guy still has two brushes. Jerome Bonaparte is not optimistic about Lionel Rothschild's rebellious behavior this time, but it does not prevent him from cooperating with Lionel Rothschild to cooperate. Whoever wins, he will help. Of course, Jerome still had a little bit of careful thought in his heart. If the uncle and nephew really fought, the huge Rothschild financial empire might really be killed by 3 generations. Okay, I agree with you. Jerome Bonaparte repeated Lionel's words. The old man should be obediently lying at home and recuperating for the rest of his life. We are of the same opinion. Lionel Rothschild took another sip of the wine, and his expression seemed a little excited by the alcohol. I heard that you are going to hold an election, so I will support you, Lionel. Rothschild gave 4 thumbs up and shook it back and forth. 4 million francs? Jerome Bonaparte asked immediately. You reading www or can't you copy FFD? Lionel Rothschild was choked by Jerome's answer. He cleared his throat and then explained euphemistically, Your Excellency, you are really joking. I'm talking about 400,000 francs. 400,000 francs. Jerome Bonaparte's expression changed from joy to disappointment. For an ordinary family, 400,000 francs is obviously an astronomical figure. It is enough for a family to live on an annuity without food or drink. Of course, the premise of these is that there is no turmoil, because every turmoil will make a group of renters. The class guy is facing bankruptcy. For Jerome, 400,000 francs to run for president is obviously a bit of a budget, and I'm afraid it will cost a lot of money for the early publicity, let alone hiring people to shout, "What a greedy guy," just like his cousin. Lionel Rothschild also cursed Jerome in his heart, with a sad expression on his face. Please forgive me, there is only so much money Rothschild can use. This revolution has cost us a lot of money. Heavy. I believe in you. Jerome Bonaparte believed that the revolution of 1848 had indeed beaten Rothschild, but as to say that he could only use so much money, Jerome could only express his gratitude and insensitivity. I understand the situation of the Rothschild family. After all, they have such a large amount of money, but they don't have the strength to defend themselves. It is easy to be attacked by lawbreakers, and now France is too violent. Adverbial serious face, but the most vicious words on his mouth. Lionel Rothschild's face showed anger, and he raised a finger again. 500,000 francs. This is the biggest cash Rothschild can use. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 28. Cooperation reached. May our unbreakable friendship last forever. Jerome Bonaparte immediately raised his glass to invite Lionel Rothschild for friendship. Lionel Rothschild also raised his glass with a false smile. He didn't know whether it was worth spending 500,000 francs to buy a vague future, but now he invests one more person, and one more. This overturned my uncle's hope. 500,000 francs is not a big expense for Lionel Rothschild. Even though the Rothschild family did lose some money in this revolution, he firmly believes that, as long as he spends this time crisis, the money lost by the family will soon be back in their arms, and those who try to run on Rothschild and bankrupt it will pay a heavy price. His Royal Highness, I said in advance that 500,000 francs can only be used as funds for your campaign. Once I find out that you are using this fund to do something unrelated to the campaign, I have the right to freeze all your funds. Lionel Rothschild saluted first, and then marched point according to his knowledge of the Bonaparte family. Once he did not impose restrictions on the use of this investment, the funds would soon be given to their subordinates by the people of the Bonaparte family. The generous Bonaparte would never he doesn't mind giving flowers to Buddha in exchange for his servants' loyalty, but he has no interest in being generous to others at the same time. Lionel Rothschild had to admit that this was the only way for the Bonaparte family to win over people's hearts. If the loyal servants did not have enough money to nourish them, they might betray them. Lionel Rothschild is convinced that the so-called loyalty is just not enough chips for betrayal. Jerome Bonaparte smiled bitterly. His careful thinking was obviously seen through by the guy in front of him. However, as a politician who is going to hold an election, the face is not so important sometimes. Baron Lionel, I think we can choose more in-depth cooperation. Jerome Bonaparte continued to speak cheekily to Lionel and Rothschild. I think the position of Minister of Finance is suitable. Someone who has the ability and means to do it, especially someone like you. Although Lionel Rothschild knew that Jerome Bonaparte was just making empty promises, his heart couldn't help but get excited. The position of the French Minister of Finance is one of the best in the whole of France and even the whole of Europe. If he can achieve the position of finance minister, he can use the power in his hand to seek welfare, and the wealth of the Rothschild family may be doubled. Of course, Lionel Rothschild only thought about it for a few seconds. The Rothschild family as the world banker is not limited to doing business in France. Too much involvement in the politics of a country only it will cause resentment in the country and other countries. For a world banker with a sense of responsibility, this is absolutely unacceptable. I'm not interested in the position of Minister of Finance. Lionel Rothschild decisively rejected the olive branch handed over by Jerome Bonaparte. That's such a pity. Jerome Bonaparte showed regret, and it seemed that he could not make the sponsor continue to vote. However, I can lend you another 1 million yuan in a private name, with an interest rate of 1 cent and 5. Lionel Rothschild continued, My God, Your Excellency the Baron. You are a vampire. Jerome Bonaparte said to Lionel Rothschild in an exaggerated tone, for a 5-cent interest, you might as well let me. What a joy to jump into the waters of the Thames. 15% interest a month, 18% interest a year, which means that if Jerome Bonaparte is not elected, he has to consider jumping directly from the very top of Paris. Sometimes, being in debt is more terrifying than death. Your Excellency, the only bank in Europe that can lend you 1 million francs is the Rothschild Bank. Lionel Rothschild said eloquently. Furthermore, as long as you sit on the throne of France, Ross, can the Child family still ask you for it? Jerome Bonaparte pretended to ponder for a few seconds, then gritted his teeth and said, Okay, I promise your terms. Wise choice. Lionel Rothschild said with a smile. However, the next second Jerome's conditions made Lionel Rothschild unable to laugh. However, I want to use the index issued by the Bank of England. The credibility of the Bank of France is about to go bankrupt. Jerome Bonaparte said helplessly, maybe, I'm going to take over a difficult mess. The French government is already actively mobilizing. Lionel Rothschild's hope of selling the Bank of France's notes was in vain. Riyadh1.com God. Their so-called regulation is to use an executive order to force France to stop the exchange, which will only damage the credibility of France. Jerome Bonaparte responded exaggeratedly. In fact, the time when the Banque de France stopped the exchange did not last long, but the high discounted exchange rate before that could not continue for a long time, and the securities also faced the problem of devaluation during this period. Lionel wants him to take over a devalued ticket, which is simply wishful thinking. Of course it's from the Bank of England. Seeing that he couldn't fool Jerome Bonaparte, Lionel Rothschild could only extinguish the little Giu in his heart. In a laughter, Jerome Bonaparte and Lionel Rothschild reached an indescribable deal. However, both of them have a little Giu regret in their hearts. If the other party can be a little stupid, this transaction will probably go more smoothly. After doing all this, Jerome Bonaparte was finally able to take care of his cousin's funeral with peace of mind. What happened on this day was more shocking to Jerome Bonaparte than what happened a month or even a year before. Feel tired ====. Time came a little to May 2nd. The morning was sunny, and it was advisable to go out for a date. On this sunny morning, an article titled From Bonaparte to Bonaparte on the life of Louis Napoleon appeared in the Times, and it was like a thunderstorm that swept through the London press, and the public opinion circle directly blew the originally turbulent London upside down. Equality, democracy, social responsibility, these things that the Chartists pursued, were published in the Times. Chapter 29, Polar Star. I vaguely remember that it was May 2nd, 1848. The content of the Times was like a charging horn that reignited the fighting spirit of us, the Charterists, who had already been beaten out. For a time, the whole of London seemed to be about to be rekindled. Recreate the pump of a year ago, but sadly the initiator of all this is not a real proletarian, not even a Democrat/Republican. All he does is to achieve a tool of his personal ambition. Hanny, Polaris and me in the early morning of May 2nd, the Polaris newspaper, which was the base of the Chartist public opinion and an advocate of the labor movement, was gearing up to prepare the ammunition for the next round of the charge. The Charter movement of 1847 made all the Charterists in the UK unite up. They formed a group to submit a letter to the government in April this year, but a month later, the coalition government still did not take any action. Respond. Note 1. Lord Palmerston did not think it was the credit of the voters. The Chartists can no longer tolerate the government's arrogant silence as a confrontational gesture, and they are ready to teach the government a lesson in the near future to let them know the power of the workers. At this time, Hanny, the editor-in-chief of Polaris, was sitting in his office, holding a pen dipped in water, thinking about the next content. The white scratch paper he pressed under his arm was full of scribbling marks. After thinking for a long time, Editor-in-Chief Hanny frowned. He lowered his head and reviewed the content he had written before, but found that most of the content he had written before was cliched content before. It is almost impossible to expect these cliched content to arouse the empathy of subscribers. Just delusional. The more Editor-in-Chief Hanny thought about it, the more upset he became. The more he read the unfinished manuscript, the more he felt unpleasant. Feeling restless, he simply crumpled the white scratch paper under his arm and threw it on the ground at will and dipped a pen in water to rewrite it. Returning to his original position, his hands pressed his head tightly like holding a basketball, his eyes stared at the desk made of rosewood, and his mouth made a crunching sound. The writing of the article obviously brought a lot of trouble to the editor-in-chief of Hanny. The trouble of not being able to write a manuscript lasted for a long time, until a hurried knock on the door from outside the office pulled Editor-in-Chief Hanny out of the trouble. Come in. Editor-in-Chief Hanny adjusted his movement slightly, moving his hands away from his head and clenching them tightly on the desk. His eyes changed from resentment to softness. Don't bring personal negative emotions to other members, especially subordinates. This is a truth that Hannah's editor-in-chief has obtained. After serving as the editor-in-chief of the Polaris, the office door opened, and a reporter walked over to Hanny holding a newspaper and said, "Editor-in-chief Hanny, look at this." When the reporter came to Hanny, Hanny realized that the reporter was holding a newspaper from the Times. The newspaper exuded a faint scent of ink, and it seemed that it had just been printed. The reporter put the Times newspaper on the table, pointed to the headline on the front page of the Times newspaper, panted and said to Hanny, "Editor, look at this article, From Bonaparte to Bonaparte." "What's the title?" Hanny read the title word by word when he first saw the title, with a little doubt in his eyes, as if he was asking the reporter what was going on. "Editor-in-chief, keep reading. After reading it, you will understand everything." The reporter impatiently continued to urge Hanny to continue reading. Hanny put aside her doubts for a while and read line by line. Because of the word count and typesetting of the article, Hanny read the entire article in less than 3 minutes. After reading the article, Hanny felt like a stormy sea. Equality, freedom, democracy, universal suffrage. This article said everything they wanted to say. The Chartists of the 19th century were not, in the final analysis, a revolutionary party. They carried the imprint of bourgeois reform from the day they were born. They did not have the desire to overthrow the government and realize democratic dictatorship. Realize that what you call freedom, equality, and equality is just a phantom that can be broken with a poke. Although some of the comments on Louis Napoleon in the article are somewhat out of place, the so-called Bonaparte thought in the article points out what Britain needs in a succinct manner. Hanny once met Louis Napoleon in a certain club and still has some impressions of Louis Napoleon, who is the author of this article. Hanny eagerly wanted to know the answer. I don't know. The reporter pointed to the blank space on the signature column of the Times and said to Hanny, "It seems that the writer doesn't want to reveal his name. Give this newspaper, cut it out, and give it to Mr. Karl Marx and Mr. Friedrich Engels. I think you should know their addresses," Hanny said to the reporter with excitement. As early as the Charter movement in 1847, the Chartists had already known Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. At the height of the Charter movement, Engels was also invited by the Polaris to serve as a bourgeois radical opponent. I see. The reporters, who were full of admiration and longing for Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, immediately agreed to Hanny's order. After Hanny explained a few trivial things to the reporter left, and Hanny, who was thinking about it, picked up the pen again to write. Point this time the content he will write is on the thought of Bonaparte and the movement for the democracy of Britain yesterday, a great fighter for freedom and equality left, and he brought us. The British government should not continue to ignore, as Louis Napoleon said, what a government needs is to establish an equal rights choice for the people. This time, Hanny, uncharacteristically, no longer takes false freedom and equality as the keynote. Instead, he uses Louis Napoleon's tone to criticize Britain's existing system from the perspective of universal suffrage and responsible government. The 3,000-word article is eloquent, but it is extremely spicy. After writing all this, Hanny reviewed the manuscript again and sealed it. P.S. 1. In the election of 1847, Mr. Hanny, the editor-in-chief of the Polaris, was elected as a candidate for the Member of Parliament of the Charterists by the district of Tevido. This district also elected Lord Palmerston, the Foreign Secretary, to the Parliament. But when Lord Palmerston called for a vote, Mr. Hanny, who had won the primary by show of hands, dropped his candidacy. Chapter 30. Turbulent Initial. In the early morning of May 5, 1848, the Polaris published on Bonaparte Thought and the Movement for the Democratization of Britain, written by the editor-in-chief Hanny on May 4 as the front page news, in order to make it easier for readers to understand the content of the news, or it is a yin and yang anger towards the government of the Kingdom of Great Britain. Polaris Star thoughtfully printed a striking ink painting in the lower right corner of the news. The bacornered hat, or Napoleon hat, looks like a podium, pointing to the map in the painting, and looking at a pair of shivering men and women in the corner, an image of bullying men and women. But on the right side of Little Fat Dun is a string of words that reads, "I want to spread French ideas here. Let your subjects rebel against you, and let universal suffrage law start by lighting up." It would be fine if it was just that. The key is that the shape of the map in the painting is basically the same as the shape of the British Isles. The pair of men and women standing on the Little Fat Dun wear a mustache, and the women are short and short. Fat. It is enough to understand without a detailed explanation that the man and woman are Victoria and Albert Point. If one takes a closer look, it will be found that the structure of the so-called podium is roughly the same as that of the Parliament Point. This picture alone is worth 1,000 words. If it is accompanied by the content of the article, it will produce a magical chemical reaction, so as to achieve the goal of spreading it by 10 or 10, and then detonating the entire public opinion circle in London. Hanny, who had printed 70,000 newspapers in one go, decisively pushed all the newspapers into the London market. He believed that the London gentlemen who liked curiosity would definitely not reject the gift that Hanny prepared for them. This country desperately needs a reform to improve the existing system. Sure enough, after the Polaris was launched into the market, it took only one morning to grab nearly 1/3 of the London market, and there were only less than 3,000 copies of the 70,000 newspapers left. Editor-in-chief, we succeeded. We succeeded. A reporter staggered through the door and yelled at Hanny, who was still in the editor's office revising the manuscript and translating for the school team. Point at the same time, all the reporters in the Polaris all raised their heads to look at the reporter, facing the gazes of many colleagues in the office. The reporter who delivered the news was unafraid to report to Hannah, who, editor-in-chief, our newspaper has sold nearly 70,000 copies in just one morning, and some areas are in short supply. Case. At this moment, almost all eyes were on editor-in-chief Hanny. Some of them were happy, some were puzzled, and some were worried. The editor-in-chief Hanny, who is the chief writer of this issue, is also shaking with excitement. The sales of 70,000 newspapers means that at least 10,000 social celebrities with small wealth will rest in their newspapers. Some of the many people can be inclined towards the Chartists, so all of Hannah's efforts have not been in vain. Of course, this is only a bold estimate. The true counterparts of the Polaris are the middle and lower classes of the working class, who are more numerous than the elites. It cannot be ruled out that a few workers will work together to buy a newspaper in any case. Editor-in-chief Hannah's first shot to the United Kingdom was very successful, and then it is necessary to completely consolidate the existing results, make steady progress, and if necessary, continue to instigate a petition campaign to force the United Kingdom to accept them conditions of. How about printing and scheduling? Can it continue to be released in the future? Hanny asked about the follow-up release. No problem. The follow-up has been arranged when I come back. The reporter raised 5 fingers and said proudly, 5 printing presses are working at the same time. Even if the whole London area subscribes to our newspaper, it is more than enough. Hanny nodded in satisfaction and got up. Now that the first shot has been fired, there is absolutely no reason to retreat in the follow-up, so he needs to find some allies. On the other hand, Jerome Bonaparte, who has sorted out all his cousin's belongings and paid the last month's rent, is quietly waiting for news from France. The article on May 4th did not seem to have caused too much waves in the British public opinion circle. It was like a small pebble submerged in the water that just swayed a small splash and disappeared without a trace. This made Jerome Bonaparte, who was confidently expecting the tide of public opinion, to doubt himself. Is it because my writing skills are not good? Or is my approach wrong? Seeing that the British public opinion did not develop as he expected, Jerome Bonaparte couldn't help but feel a little upset. The defeat of British public opinion seems to be a foregone conclusion. If the French public opinion circle is as dead as the British public opinion circle, you reading www.urkanchu.com's own plan is obviously a smashed halberd. At that time, what method should I use to get my cousin to return to France became Jerome's #1 question. I'm going out for a walk. The impetuous Jerome Bonaparte decided to lead Ham, a pet dog adopted by Louis Napoleon in Britain, for a walk. Your Highness, let Fleury go out with you. Persigny, who was worried that Jerome Bonaparte went out alone, suggested to Jerome Bonaparte, no need, I'm just going out to relax. Jerome Bonaparte decisively rejected Persigny's suggestion. He didn't want to lose his freedom of life before he became president. Your Highness, please take this with you. Persigny returned to the room and took out a fine quality revolver and a cane, with a sword hidden in the cane. Jerome Bonaparte took the cane and revolver handed by Persigny and led Ham and walked along Chafaret Street until he reached St. Martin's Church. At the junction of the poor area and the rich area, Jerome Bonaparte found that the surrounding police force was significantly more than that of Piccadilly Street. Many vigilantes were holding canes and revolvers like Jerome Bonaparte. Watching warily into the distance. Jerome Bonaparte followed the vigilantes' gaze and looked into the distance. There were many people in the cafe not far from St. Martin's Church. Some of them were brightly dressed and some were ragged in front of the cafe. Because Jerome's place is too far from the cafe, he can only vaguely hear words such as Napoleon and equality. This aroused Jerome's exuberant curiosity, and he decided to go and find out. Chapter 31, Son of Britain. Just as Jerome Bonaparte was about to lead Ham to the cafe to find out, a pair of white arms blocked Jerome Bonaparte's direction. Jerome Bonaparte looked. The eyes of the owner of the arm revealed doubts. The owner of the arm was a young man in a light blue flak coat and jeans, holding an old musket, and he said to Jerome with a grim expression, "Sir, you can't go any further. God knows, will that mob do anything to a gentleman like you?" Only then did Jerome Bonaparte remember that in 1848 Britain was at the climax of the Charter movement, which almost overturned the British royal family, and the movement continued until 1851 before it stopped. Jerome Bonaparte thanked the youth. He didn't want to be involved in this political turmoil. Every major political turmoil meant a large-scale conflict. Sometimes the conflict was too intense. In this case, it would lead to a **** conflict, either his own blood or the enemy's blood. He didn't want to splash 3 steps in Britain, and now he just wanted to return to France safely. Seeing that Jerome Bonaparte gave up the idea of moving forward, the young man glanced at Jerome Bonaparte's costume and introduced himself enthusiastically. "I'm George John who lives in Picadio. May I ask who you are?" "Jerome Stalin." Jerome Bonaparte, who was wary of the answer people, made a nonsense name full of bad taste. "Mr. Stalin." George John seriously addressed Jerome Bonaparte as Mr. Stalin, which made Jerome couldn't help laughing. "I don't know if the loving father in the future knows if I use his name and will directly slay me." Jerome Bonaparte silently complained in his heart. Then his face quickly faded into a smile and his expression became more serious. "That, Mr. Stalin, why are you laughing?" George John wondered. "I'm reminded of happy things." "Go on," said Jerome Bonaparte to George's John. "That, Mr. Stalin, I wonder if you are interested in joining our team." George John asked tentatively. "Your team?" Jerome Bonaparte looked at George John up and down. Judging from his movements and standing, the person in front of him was probably a community vigilante, and he didn't want any money. "That's right." Jerome Bonaparte was instantly elated by George John and described the benefits of the community vigilantes, such as being able to legally receive and grant donations and $0 purchases for the poor. In such cases, it can be transferred to the regular establishment of the British police and the like. To put it bluntly, he is a casual worker who doesn't need money. If there is a problem, the temporary worker will take the blame, and all the credit is due to the leadership of the British police. In terms of treatment, it is not even as good as the National Guard of France next door. "Then, what is your position?" Jerome Bonaparte asked. "I've been appointed as the captain of the vigilante squad in Picadio," said George John, who was beaming at Jerome Bonaparte. He didn't know what he looked like and thought he was appointed by the Prime Minister as a minister of a certain department. It is good for young people to have warm blood, but sometimes they are unlucky because of their warm blood. Jerome, who claims to have experienced never dissuaded this young man. George John was not much younger than Jerome Bonaparte. Only by making him suffer a little, he will understand the world. Not all things are favorable. Jerome Bonaparte just opened his mouth to express his refusal to George John when a shout came from the direction of the cafe. "We want bread. We want work. We want universal suffrage. We want democracy." Immediately afterwards, the workers who gathered in the cafe followed suit. Although they don't know what democracy and universal suffrage are, they listen to those big figures, charterists, saying that as long as universal suffrage and democracy are realized, bread and jobs will be there. "Go. Let's go to the city hall to petition." After someone in the crowd suddenly said petition, the voices of petition came one after another, and the workers with herd mentality also followed them and shouted petition. The person in charge of organizing this speech also did not expect that the people would support them so enthusiastically, referring to the charterists, and he was as high-spirited as a general commanding thousands of troops. Seeing him jump off the podium made up of 2 wooden boxes, everyone subconsciously made way for the person in charge. A mighty petition troop turned into a front troop and moved towards London City Hall. The charter representative walked right in front of the troop. Behind him were the unemployed workers and the elite who had been forced into the proletariat. The place where Jerome Bonaparte is the place where the petitioning force is about to review. Riyadh1.com. Almost all the vigilantes and special police, also made up of British temporary workers, take care of their weapons and take the blame for accidents. Looking forward to it, the scene became a little anxious for a while. In this atmosphere, Jerome Bonaparte could even hear a policeman 3 meters away from him swallowing saliva. "Man, it looks like we're in trouble." George John's voice trembled slightly. This was the first time he faced the petitioning force. In the past, he just heard from his neighbors. "I think so too." Jerome Bonaparte agreed with the same sympathy. Ham, who was held by Jerome, also grinned twice. Seeing that the parade was getting closer, Jerome Bonaparte wanted to leave, but he didn't want to get involved in this politics maelstrom. When Jerome Bonaparte was about to turn around and leave, George John's hand grabbed Jerome Bonaparte's cuff. "George. Mr. Stalin, you can't go." George John begged and looked at Jerome Bonaparte. "Damn it. I'm not a vigilante. I have no obligation to help the government suppress them." Jerome Bonaparte resisted his anger and said to George John, "Mr. Stalin, look around." George John pointed to the surrounding vigilantes and whispered into Jerome Bonaparte's ear, "If you leave rashly, the entire team may collapse. If the investigation is done, you will be sent to a military court." Jerome Bonaparte laughed angrily and said, "I'm just an innocent passerby. You treat a foreign friend like this? Sir, this is Britain." George John also responded helplessly, "Bitch of the United Kingdom." Jerome Bonaparte cursed in a low voice. Chapter 32. Workers' Riot. "We want bread. We are going to work. We want universal suffrage. We need rest, sleep, and a 9-hour workday." The crowd from the cafe door shouted and vented their dissatisfaction in hysterical voices. The double blow of the railroad speculation and the failure of the Irish potato harvest made this already overwhelmed and destitute worker completely into hell. They didn't want to live in such a mess. They don't want to go through the desperation of watching their children die of starvation, with a meal without a meal. Since they, referring to the bureaucracy and the UK elite, say that all men are created equal. Why can people in the West End be able to live without suffering from hunger and disease, but they can only curl up in dark corners to eat the leftover food of those people? It's really because they didn't work hard enough. The world shouldn't be like this. The ignorant class of the workers noticed the deception from London's high society, but they couldn't tell what was going on. The simple class concept makes them believe that there must be people in this world who are willing to help them. Now there is someone who is willing to help them, and he, members of the Chartist movement, tells them, workers, to fight for their rights, for bread and for work, and they have done part of what they promised. Note 1. They, referring to the workers, will also follow their, referring to the Charterists, command and strive for more rights for themselves. The procession slowly advanced towards St. Martin's Church, and new workers continued to join their ranks on the way to St. Martin's Church. A team that originally had only more than 100 people gradually expanded to more than 200 people. Looking towards London Bridge from St. Martin's Church, you can also see many workers gathered together, as if to cross London Bridge to the West End. More than 30 police officers around St. Martin's Church couldn't help swallowing their saliva when they looked at the workers who were several times larger than them. Those who are only equipped with smoothbore pistols are not the opponents of those people. Those untouchables who are slightly inferior to them only need to swarm them and tear them to pieces. Several of the police officers almost ran away because of the pressure. If it wasn't for more than a dozen regular police officers who entered at the right time. The head of more than a dozen police officers is a fat man with a big belly. He wears a dark green system and wears a medal on his chest. He doesn't look like a qualified sheriff, but a man with no ink on his chest and no hands. A traditional noble who binds the power of chickens. "Sir, what should we do now?" The police officer in charge of support looked at the mighty crowd and asked with some trepidation. After the fat police officer looked at the mighty crowd in the distance, his expression was a little horrified. He glared fiercely at the policeman who wanted him to make up his mind. Which asterisk told Lao Tzu that there were only a dozen or so demonstrators. The one who was stared at by the fat policeman could only lower his head and not allow the fat policeman to look at each other. Since he has come here, he must not let these untouchables break in rashly. Otherwise, the nobles in the West End would have skinned him. Thinking of the sullen eyes of the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, the fat policeman couldn't help shuddering. "What else can I do?" The fat policeman gritted his teeth and whispered, "You must not let these guys in, otherwise, I will be finished." Pleasant to the eye, the fat policeman glanced at the regular policeman beside him and added, "I'm finished. You guys are having a hard time. Don't think I don't know what you do in your daily life, you bunch of scumbags, rice buckets, and villains." The hearts of more than a dozen regular police officers could not help but feel tight. They were very aware of what they were doing on weekdays. If the fat policeman really fell, they would not be better off. Those colleagues who have not yet entered the system do not mind reporting their crimes to the Metropolitan Police Department to replace them. But, sir, our existing troops are simply not enough. Don't worry, I'll report the situation here to the National Police Agency in a while. I believe they will continue to send more personnel, and besides, isn't there still them? The fat policeman pointed at Jerome Bonaparte, and others as a matter of course. We had a total of more than 50 people. I can't believe that we can't stop those untouchables. Are they really not afraid of guns? Afterwards, the fat policeman pointed at the vigilante with his halberd arrogantly and said, "You all have to obey my orders now. Do you understand that?" Jerome Bonaparte led him to the front and said, "I'm just an innocent passerby, not a vigilante, so can you let me go?" "No." The fat policeman said roughly to Jerome Bonaparte, "Every resident has an obligation to stop this riot." The fat policeman, caught in a nameless rage, could not wait to break a person in half for use. How could it be possible for Jerome Bonaparte to leave? You reading www.urkanshu.com. Okay. Jerome Bonaparte could only return to the team, holding the revolver pinned to his waist in his hand. The parade team only had 5 minutes before they came to the Stability Maintenance Brigade, composed of vigilantes and police officers. The fat policeman, hiding behind the regular policeman, looked at the group of workers with resentment and numbness in their eyes and said, "You pigs, untouchables, who let you participate in the parade? Who organized you? Your behavior is betrayal of the United Kingdom. You are treasonous." The fat policeman's strategy of getting people first worked really well. Some workers couldn't help but take a small step back after hearing the word treason. The small-scale riot broke out among the more than 200 workers, and Jerome Bonaparte, one of the vigilantes, couldn't help shaking his head secretly. Workers who have not undergone formalized military training are even inferior to a group of pigs in terms of discipline and combat effectiveness. Only when workers have undergone complete militarized training and become disciplined can they compete with the regular army. In this extremely critical situation, the man standing at the front stepped forward and said, "We are useless and treasonous, and we are not willing to conflict with you. We just want to fight for the rights we deserve, and we have tried too much." They negotiated, but never heard back. In the end, we found that this was the only way to get them to value us. PS. 1. Thanks to the brief collapse of the old two parties in 1847, there was a brief confusion in the political arena of the United Kingdom. Charter petition. Although the 10-hour day bill was passed by the Crown Court, it did not fundamentally improve the interests of workers. Chapter 33. While conflict. No matter what you say, your actions are a betrayal of the country. The country has nurtured you for so many years, and you treat your motherland like this? The fat police officer, who was deeply educated by the aristocratic elite, scorned the proletariat living at the bottom, believing that their existence was to smear the whole of Britain, and even put on a high profile for the workers who petitioned. "Fuck your mum, you fat dead pig." Some grumpy workers in the petition crowd couldn't help but utter a classic scolding. Immediately afterwards, more and more people in the crowd began to greet the fat police officer's family. Looking at the passionate crowd, Jerome Bonaparte shrugged helplessly. The fat police officer's high face not only did not ease the current tension, but further intensified the conflict. The roars of the workers gathered together to form a wave of voices that attacked the fat police officer and his subordinates. "Judeo is pointed by thousands of people, and it will die without a problem." The sound of nearly 200 slurs condensed to the point where the fat police officer and his policemen were frightened enough. Facing the menacing workers, the fat police officer couldn't help but took a small step back, hid behind an official police officer, curled up his upper body slightly and shouted sternly, "You better disband where you are now, or else the army will be stationed in London. They will wipe you all out." The fat police officer's nonsense remarks once again caused a certain degree of confusion among the workers' groups. The word army is a huge violent machine for ordinary people, and they will mercilessly crush the workers with their belts. "The army?" the head of the backbone of the workers said slowly. "According to the Police Act enacted by Minister Peel in 1829, the army will not be stationed under normal circumstances. We are only willing to the city hall, not to launch a riot. There will be no army coming in. Don't worry, my fellow citizens, he's just bluffing." The words of the person in charge obviously gave confidence to the workers group. and some workers who wanted to withdraw from the petition, when they heard the army had moved in, cheered up again. You bastard. The fat police officer scolded the person in charge of organizing the workers' petition in a low voice. It seems that the current situation is no longer a problem that the sheriff in his area can resist. Only the officials from the city hall and even the ministers in Downing Street can solve it. As long as you go back honestly, I will report your petition to the city hall. Go back. The fat policeman's attitude has changed from tough to negotiating now. He also wants to prevent this group of workers from entering the West District. This gentleman, the person in charge said impatiently, we are tired of your rhetoric, and every time we are asked to wait. How long do we have to wait? And how long do we have to wait? Isn't it? Wait until our anger has been worn away by time, our lives have dissipated, and you who are immersed in the world of feasting and feasting will start to solve the problem. At that time, I'm afraid that you will only fake 2 cheap tears and then sit back on the original life. We don't want to wait any longer. We have to rely on our own actions to fight for our own interests. The fat policeman opened his mouth and didn't know what to say. He had no other way to hold back the mob. Mr. Sheriff, for God's sake, please let us go, or let those guys from City Hall come over. Don't waste our time with each other. The conditions for the person in charge are not harsh, but the fat police officer has no ability to get the City Hall to come over, and he doesn't even have the ability to let his immediate superior, the Metropolitan Sheriff, take a look at the current situation. This group of docile mobs, instigated by people with a heart, turned into beasts that only want to choose and devour them. The usual deterrent and intimidating words are completely useless now. Damn, I'm not even afraid of the police anymore. This is no longer an ordinary citizen. Now is not the time to hesitate. We must strike hard. At this critical juncture, the fat police officer uncharacteristically gritted his teeth and gave the order, load the bullets. Both the vigilante and the police showed their amazed eyes after receiving the fat police officer's order. At this time, loading the bullets completely ignited the originally scorching atmosphere. These want to kill us. Fight with them. Destroy this bunch of government bastards. The fat policeman's order pushed the scorching atmosphere to a climax again, and the workers became irritable under the stimulation of the scorching atmosphere. Some workers even stood in the same row with the person in charge to put pressure on the vigilantes and police. Under this silent pressure, a young man among the vigilantes finally couldn't bear the pressure and pulled the trigger. Hearing the sound of a bang, a white smoke emerged from the muzzle of the smoothbore pistol. Read1.com. The solid round bullet was pushed out of the barrel of the gun by the black powder at an extremely fast speed and shot towards the workers. What? There was a heart-wrenching cry from the workers, and blood flowed from the shoulders of a worker in the front row. The worker, who was in unbearable pain, fell to the ground and covered his shoulders. This normality, which no one expected, directly turned the conflict between the police and the workers from a literature fight into a military one. Almost all the workers looked at the fat policeman resentfully. Who told you to shoot? The fat police officer shouted angrily as he watched the shooting vigilante with murderous eyes. The vigilante's hand holding the smoothbore pistol trembled uncontrollably, and the fat police officer's anger made the vigilante's hands release the smoothbore pistol, and the smoothbore pistol fell to the ground and issued a dull sound of, "You lackeys. Go to hell." The injury of a worker directly caused the workers group to lose their restraint, and they quickly approached the police team. From their eyes, you can see resentment and killing intent. Shoot. Shoot. The fat police officer Zhang Huan was at a loss, wanted to shoot the workers again. Fuck, you stupid pig. Jerome Bonaparte couldn't help yelling loudly. Facing the worker who was only more than 10 meters away from him, Jerome decisively gave up the cumbersome revolver and chose a blackthorn cane to fight back. Even though he sympathized with the workers in his heart, if he didn't fight back, the furious workers would tear him to shreds. "Follow me, George," Jerome Bonaparte shouted at George John, who just woke up like a dream. Jerome Bonaparte, holding a blackthorn cane, loosened the noose that restrained Ham and launched a countercharge at the workers group. Chapter 34. Catch the thief first, catch the king. Stop him. In the face of the countercharge Jerome Bonaparte, the unarmed workers were at a loss for a while, and the person in charge of the Chartists who was in charge of organizing the petition was even more at a loss, and shouted point. Jerome Bonaparte rushed in front of one of the workers, and turned his staff into a sword, and stabbed at the abdomen of the worker directly in front of him. Point. The worker who was hit by the cane in the blackthorn groaned in pain, and the fist, that should have been clenched, had to be released, covering his stomach and curling up, obviously losing his fighting power. George's John, who followed Jerome Bonaparte, also knocked down a worker. Jerome couldn't help but look at the young man in front of him. Point. Although they are facing hungry workers, it is not easy to defeat them easily. Young man, it's not bad. Jerome Bonaparte encouraged George John, and George John, in the tone of someone who had come over while avoiding the surprise attack, "Thank you." George John smirked distractedly. Taking advantage of George John's distraction, the worker beside him quickly grabbed one of his arms holding a cane. Seeing this, George John quickly stretched out his foot and kicked it hard at the worker's calf. A sharp pain came from the worker's calf. The pain caused the worker to lose his mind for a while, and the strength of his palm weakened. When George John seized the opportunity to break free from the worker's palm, he used his cane to hit the worker's head with a stick, and the worker, whose head was severely injured, fell to the ground. The workers group lost 3 people in less than half a minute, which severely dampened their morale, and some people who were not determined to withdraw from the battlefield. Point. On the other hand, the morale of the vigilantes and the regular police officers who were inspired by Jerome Bonaparte and George's John increased greatly. They found that, although the group of guys in front of them were far more numerous than themselves, their physical fitness increased, and the organization is far inferior to them, and it is completely possible to fight. "Sheriff, let's go," one of the police officers said. When he saw this, the fat police officer pondered the pros and cons of taking the initiative. If he can suppress this mob before the support arrives, then he will undoubtedly be a great hero in calming the turmoil, and he will be promoted and rich just around the corner. Thinking of the fat sheriff who was associated with this group of mob in his official career, he decisively ordered, "Everyone will put a baton on me, and those who don't have a baton will give me a cane. Be sure to suppress this riot." The so-called baton is a solid wooden stick made of coarse wood from America. The whole body of the stick is painted with black paint to make it look more deterrent. This kind of wood is often used for railways. The hardness of the sleeper is evident, and the baton is enough to leave a red mark on the body. Point. In addition to a variety of hands, the equipment of the vigilantes' pistols are mostly canes and short solid wooden sticks. More than a dozen police officers with regular staff rushed down the mountain like tigers, and rushed into the workers' group with queer wood batons. The workers who have no experience in fighting can only retreat from left to right, and the frontline presents a one-sided stance all day long. The remaining dozens of policemen also rushed to the front with various weapons to fight the workers. With the passage of time, more and more unarmed workers were beaten with bruised noses, and only a few workers seized the opportunity to take away the weapons of the vigilantes and confronted them. However, this still did not change the reversal of the war situation. The workers fought and retreated from St. Martin's Church all the way to London Bridge. Point. The team also had more than 200 people reduced to about 150 people. "Work harder. We are about to win," the fat sheriff in charge of the battle shouted, and his face showed unexhaled joy. Point. Just a little bit. Almost. We can drive these untouchables back to the ghetto. The fat sergeant has fantasized about being received by the Home Secretary and becoming the Deputy Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police District. Maybe he might even become the Commissioner. According to the Metropolitan Police Act formulated by Home Secretary Peel in 1829, a Metropolitan Police Force including West Minth, Middlesex, Surrey and Kent was established with London as the core, directly led by the Home Secretary, the prototype of the modern police system. But reality gave the fat sheriff a heavy blow. A team armed with hammers, long sticks and short knives was running along the river in the west end of London towards them. Our team is here," shouted the leader of the labor movement, who was struggling to support the Charterists. The demoralized workers quickly recovered themselves. They gathered in 2s and 3s. One blocked the wave of vigilantes with their hands, and the other grabbed the arms of the vigilantes. When they saw it, the morale of the police force weakened again, and the fat sheriff wanted to flee. No, the king must be captured. In the crowd, Jerome Bonaparte vigorously waved the cane in his hand and shouted at the police, "Come here, some people." The 3 regular police officers and 3 civilian police officers approached in the direction of Jerome Bonaparte. Jerome Bonaparte picked up the blackthorn cane and slammed it on the worker's thigh, causing the worker whose center of gravity was unsteady to fall directly to the ground. "Quick, help me open a way, I want to catch the leader." Jerome Bonaparte held a cane in his right hand and took out a revolver at his waist in his left. The workers who were close to Jerome immediately stopped when they saw this, and Jerome Bonaparte quickly shot into the sky. The sound of gunfire made everyone present froze, and Jerome seized the opportunity to knock down another worker. The police and vigilantes who followed around, he also followed in the footsteps of Jerome Bonaparte and rushed forward. Jerome Bonaparte, who had been fired from a passage in the crowd, and his party came to the head of the workers' movement. With a gun in his left hand and a cane in his right hand, Jerome aimed the gun at the person in charge's chest, and George John grabbed the person in charge's arm so that he couldn't escape. The rest of the police took out their smoothbore and revolvers and aimed them at the workers. "Everyone, if you don't want him to die, just stop for me," Jerome Bonaparte shouted in savage words. Jerome Bonaparte was very upset to be coerced into a vigilante for no reason. He didn't feel like he was participating in this useless battle. The workers stopped when they heard what Jerome Bonaparte said. "Make way," Jerome said to the workers, putting his revolver behind the person in charge. The worker whose backbone was caught consciously gave way, and the scarred police and vigilantes rushed Jerome Bonaparte and George John out of the encirclement. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 35, Reinforcement Arrive. Jerome Bonaparte, who held the petitioner in charge and rushed out of the encirclement, was quickly supported by vigilantes and regular police outside the encirclement. They held blunt weapons and smoothbore pistols to block Jerome Bonaparte's before point. After seeing that the person in charge had been kidnapped, the workers who had thrown the rat trap did not dare to step forward for fear that Jerome Bonaparte would kill the respected gentleman. "Let go of Mr. McGrady's, you bastard," the radical worker shouted and asked Jerome to let go, but Jerome turned a deaf ear. He looked curiously at the person in charge of the unrest, who was wearing glasses and looked like a good gentleman, and asked, "You are McGrath, the person in charge of this strike?" McGrath, member of the executive committee of the Charterist Association, the head of the Charterist petition named McGrath, kept his demeanor despite being under siege. Jerome Bonaparte said in a passionate voice, "Sir, the purpose of our strike is only to just fight for our own rights. Is it wrong for us to pursue our own rights? Is it wrong for us to pursue our own happiness? We work 15 or 16 hours a day, isn't it hard enough?" McGrath's speech silenced Jerome Bonaparte, who in his heart longed to stand with McGrath and even the workers of the world, because he thrived under the red flag from a young age, but from his ass, he could never be too close to them. The power of workers was too weak in the 19th century. In this era, when the aristocracy and the emerging bourgeoisie jointly ruled, the proletariat was deprived of the right to speak. Jerome knew that, even if he stood with the workers, the final result would be just one more exile, or be killed in a certain uprising. Compared with Jerome Bonaparte's fine points, the fat sheriff has obviously completely transformed into a thorough bourgeois executioner. The fat sheriff, who saw that the workers who were throwing the rat and the rat did not dare to step forward, changed his timid attitude again. He raised his chest and raised his head in front of McGrath, spitting arrogantly, and said contemptuously, "You are just a bunch of garbage, Big. The purpose of your existence is..." Before the fat sheriff could finish humiliating McGrath, Jerome Bonaparte, whose face was full of irritability, interrupted the fat sheriff forcefully. "Shut up, Mr. Stupid." The fat sheriff's voice stopped abruptly, and with a trace of anger on his face, he pointed at Jerome Bonaparte and shouted, "You are the vigilante in that area who yelled at me, do you know that? Can I let you in too?" The fat sheriff's arrogant words made Jerome Bonaparte, who was originally irritable, even more irritable. He took out the gun and aimed it at the fat sheriff's feet and pulled the trigger, only to hear a bang. The revolver shot. White smoke appeared at the muzzle of the gun, and the smoke was filled with the choking smell of gunpowder, and a small hole also appeared at the feet of the fat sheriff. The sudden change made the fat sheriff unable to react at all, and it was over. The fat sheriff, whose voice trembled because of his fright, pointed at Jerome Bonaparte. "You bastard, idiot. I told you to be quiet." Jerome Bonaparte didn't show any sympathy for the idiot in front of him. The workers' anger was getting bigger and bigger. "Come up." Jerome doesn't want to accompany the stupid sheriff to die. The conflict between Jerome and the fat sheriff gradually eased the originally tense atmosphere, and the workers looked at the policemen who were caught in the infighting in confusion. Several official members of the police team also showed schadenfreude smiles. A stupid boss is everyone's nightmare. Mr. McGrath. Jerome Bonaparte ignored the fat sheriff's eyes that wanted to kill and turned to the prisoner in a negotiating tone. "Can you let those working brothers go back first?" Brother McGrath has not heard the word brother for a long time. Most decent people only regard workers as the lowest class of pariahs. McGrath looked at Jerome Bonaparte curiously and said, "Sir, please allow me to refuse. Even if you kill me today, they will not leave. Only the government agrees to our terms." Jerome Bonaparte shrugged and said, "Mr. McGrath, believe me, the United Kingdom government will never agree to your conditions. They will only treat you as thugs and arrest you all. We resist. We strike. We want them to see our determination." McGrath said in high spirits. "It's useless. Strikes can't solve the problem. Capital can be alienated into tools, and for factory owners, the tools are useless and can be replaced." Jerome Bonaparte pointed to the workers standing opposite them and said, "The factory owners, the loss of short-term benefits is acceptable, can they? Workers in Britain work very hard every day, and you reading www.ucanshu.com can only maintain a level where a family of 3 does not starve to death. They can only fight on the premise of maintaining food and clothing. People who are starving to death are not qualified to fight. If I were them, I would make all the factory owners in London unite and blacklist all those who do not obey the discipline. What will you do at that time?" Jerome Bonaparte continued to ask a sentence. McGrath was speechless. He, who was able to organize a strike, didn't think about such issues at all. "You organized a strike with all your blood, but you couldn't end it. If the workers lose their jobs because of the strike, what is the difference between you and the government of the United Kingdom?" Jerome Bonaparte continued to export to McGrath. "We want to overthrow the bourgeoisie and seize our rights." McGrath's tone was somewhat lacking. "By what to overthrow? What do you have? What is your foundation? What is the object of your unity?" Jerome asked a series of questions. McGrath was even more speechless. He suddenly felt that the guy in front of him seemed to understand the revolution better than him. "Reinforcement are here." The police officer who was sent by the fat sheriff to seek reinforcement returned panting and shouted, and behind him was a force of more than 200 vigilantes and police officers. "Looks like you can't run away," Jerome Bonaparte said to McGrath, spreading his hands. Reinforced vigilantes and police forces joined forces to arrest all the workers and put them in jail. McGrath, an advocate, was also arrested and jailed. Surprisingly, Jerome Bonaparte, who was originally a police savior, was also arrested. Chapter 36, Detention Facility. "I suspect this guy has connections to the mob. Arrest him." The arrival of the reinforcement made the whole battle come to an end in a clean manner. The fat sheriff once again returned to his former domineering stance. His arrogant halberd pointed at Jerome Bonaparte and asked the police to arrest him. Several police officers who fought alongside Jerome Bonaparte looked at each other but did not make a move. Are you trying to disobey my order?" The sheriff was furious against the disrespectful man. Later, he pointed to several police officers who were not familiar with Jerome Bonaparte to arrest him. "Mr. Stalin is not a mob. Mr. Stalin has just helped us." George John stood up to speak up for Jerome Bonaparte, and Jerome Bonaparte showed a gratified smile. "This kid still has some conscience. I said he was a mob, but he was a mob." The fat sheriff used his privileges to mess around and said, "Who knows if he is a complicit from the mob just now? Maybe he is the inner responder of the mob." George John was speechless in anger. "Okay, my child. Jerome Bonaparte gently patted George John's shoulder and said kindly, "There is no reason for this kind of scum, you." The fat sheriff rolled up his sleeves and wanted to beat up Jerome Bonaparte. "Ah. You sure you want to fight me?" Jerome Bonaparte kindly reminds, "If it is a private duel, it will kill people." The fat sheriff suddenly realized that Jerome Bonaparte pulled up the cuffs resentfully after his performance just now. The fat sheriff's fear of death deeply aroused the contempt of his subordinates and fellow police officers in the 19th century, when the dueling spirit of the nobles had not yet completely declined. Private duels were undoubtedly an event suitable for all ages. Anyone who dare not take on the challenge will be tried to be a coward, unable to hold his head in the noble class. Therefore, there are many nobles and commoners who choose to duel for the sake of temporary resentment. In Britain, the number of deaths due to duels every year is no less than that of car accidents. "Quick! Catch him for me!" the fat sheriff shouted in anger. Although the fat sheriff knew that he couldn't help the guy in front of him, he still wanted Jerome Bonaparte to have a taste of what it was like to live in a detention center. Several police officers surrounded Jerome Bonaparte. One of them said with an apologetic smile, "Sir, do you have anything else to pass on to your family?" The police officer's implication was to allow Jerome Bonaparte to find his family for bail. After all, London prisons can only hold poor ghosts, but not gentlemen from the United Kingdom. After Jerome Bonaparte explained the location of the Louis mansion to George John, he handed ham and his cane to George John. "I must bring what I said to the man in the mansion." "I see." George John nodded in understanding. When he was parting, Jerome Bonaparte seemed to think of something, and he shouted at George John, "Let the mansion tell my family that I was sent to prison by the people of the United Kingdom. They will sue me as a worker. Please." George John did not understand what Jerome Bonaparte meant, but he still decided to tell the people in the mansion what Jerome Bonaparte said word for word. Jerome Bonaparte and McGrath arrived at the detention center in the Metropolitan Police District of London after more than 200 police officers sent each other intimately. "Sheriff, it doesn't look like this is a prison," Jerome Bonaparte said to the fat sheriff with a smile. "You." The fat sheriff didn't say a word and ordered 2 police officers to put Jerome Bonaparte and McGrath together in the same detention center. The detention center is not very big, but it is clean and tidy. 2 wooden cots, a wooden round table, and an extinguished kerosene lamp on the square table are all the decorations of the detention center. The sun shines into the room through the square iron window, which is the only place where the whole room can be translucent. The door with the iron window completely cuts off the connection between Jerome Bonaparte and the outside world. There is nothing important at the moment. Jerome Bonaparte had to lie on the cot and wait for Pessin's rescue. Even if George John didn't pass the message to Pessin, his angel investor Lionel Rothschild would also come and bail him out. Jerome didn't just wander into the detention center. Sometimes staying inside would have a much stronger influence than staying inside. A certain South African great man in later generations inspired Jerome. Besides, since the situation outside is so chaotic, prison is the best way to get out of the whirlpool. When Jerome Bonaparte was lying on the bed, he was about to close his eyes when McGrath's voice woke him up. "Huh." Jerome Bonaparte opened his eyes and looked at McGrath with a tangled face. "Is there anything wrong?" "That." McGrath reorganized his language and asked, "What are the answers to those questions you just said in that place www.riyadh1.com? What questions?" Jerome Bonaparte scratched his head and asked, "Rely on what to overthrow? What?" McGrath repeated Jerome Bonaparte's original question again. "This." Jerome Bonaparte looked at McGrath with interest and continued to roll over and lie down. "You bastard." McGrath hesitated for a long time, then gritted his teeth and said, "Tell me." "How can you tell me?" Jerome Bonaparte stood up again and looked at McGrath, then shook his head and said, "Mr. Karl Marx and Mr. Friedrich Engels are obviously more authoritative than me on this question. You should go to them. Say, my question just now, Jerome." Bonaparte gave McGrath the fragment of dragons laying in his memory in oral form. Having said that, Jerome Bonaparte summed up, "Sometimes revolution may not appear in the strongest places of imperialism, but those weak places are more evolutionary, especially in those areas with sharp contradictions." "You mean Ireland?" McGrath seemed to understand something. "I didn't say anything." Jerome Bonaparte showed her I don't have look on the surface, but he was looking forward to the sharp contradiction between Britain and Ireland, whether it can be catalyzed by dragon slaying, a bomb of sufficient weight. The future is up to you. Jerome Bonaparte said to McGrath in the tone of a visitor. Having said that, Jerome Bonaparte lay on the bed and closed his eyes, leaving McGrath alone to chew and digest the knowledge taught by Jerome Bonaparte. Chapter 37, Republican Lamartine. While the Chartist movement is in full swing in its final death struggle, the French Republic, which is only separated from the Kingdom of Great Britain by a strait, is also saving for the coming upheaval point. The February Revolution detonated the whole of France, and at the same time spread the flame of the revolution to Italy and Germany through Lyon and Strasbourg. The Republic cannot repeat the mistakes of 1793, and the revolutionary enthusiasm must end. Everything is for France. Stopping the revolution and preserving the fruits of the Republic has become Lamartine's top priority, and he has been working hard for this goal. Lamartine, a Girondin statesman in the mouth of Marx, served as the interim head of the government when the provisional government of the Second Republic was established, and served as the Minister of Foreign Affairs from February 24 to May 11, 1848. However, there is a gap between ideal and reality. Once the Pandora's box of revolution is opened, it will be extremely difficult to close it again. Especially in this case. With the fall of the July dynasty, the proletariat and the industrial bourgeoisie, who were originally united as one, quickly parted ways. This pair of two classes that were originally in secondary contradictions, because of the political imbalance of the July dynasty, united together. After the main contradiction disappeared, the secondary contradiction became the main contradiction. Under the increasingly acute class contradictions, workers began to spontaneously unite to smash machines and strike. Those capitalists who benefited from the revolution also fought tit for tat. They organized personnel to beat workers who wanted to dismantle machines, and united in the National Assembly. Under the banner of the Party of Order and the Conservative Republican Party, it pushed the National Assembly to dissolve the provisions of the National Factory Law. The conflict between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie made Paris, which was already turbulent, even more panicking, and it also made Lamartine feel that the burden on his shoulders was even greater. Thinking of this, Lamartine, who was standing in front of the study window of his apartment in Rue Saint-Honoré, could not help frowning. I'm afraid that such a rebellious nation can only be controlled by Emperor Napoleon. In Lamartine's mind, the words rebellious appeared. Lamartine, who had reacted, shook his head and laughed at himself. I actually have this idea too. Having said that, he turned around and sat back at the desk to read the National Republic, Reform and many other newspapers. Since the February Revolution lifted the censorship of books and periodicals, newspapers in France, especially in the Seine, Paris, have sprung up like mushrooms after a rain. It has deeply influenced the public opinion orientation of the entire Seine province. As the interim head of the Republic, Lamartine has to review the contents of the newspapers one by one. It is Lamartine's daily compulsory course to understand the public opinion orientation of the whole Paris through the content of the newspaper. Lamartine, who was reading the newspaper, suddenly saw an interesting article in the Constitutionalist. The Constituantist was the newspaper of the French bourgeoisie, published daily in Paris from 1815 to 1870. In the 1940s it was the organ of the moderate wing of the Orleanists, during the Revolution of 1848 to 1849. It reflected the views of the counter-revolutionary bourgeoisie headed by Thiers. After the coup of December 1851 became the Bonapartist newspaper. From Bonaparte to Bonaparte, Lamartine read the title of the article, and the Italian accented guy who claimed to be Napoleon's successor appeared again in his mind. After the February Revolution, I met that guy once, and I don't know how he is doing in the United Kingdom now. Meeting once refers to the fact that after the February Revolution, Napoleon III entered Paris with a gesture of agreeing with the revolution and supporting the Republic. However, the Lamartine government did not expel Napoleon III from the French Republic on the grounds that Napoleon III was a war criminal. Lamartine continued to look at the next content, and his expression became more and more solemn. Universal suffrage, responsible government, equality for all. Each of them tickled Lamartine's nerves like the devil. Although Lamartine, who retains the romantic style, subconsciously agrees with some of the points of the article. This article may cause an already polarized France to plunge into a greater turmoil. If possible, he really wanted to issue an order to ban this article completely. It's a pity that the Second Republic he hastily founded did not give him such rights. Lamartine continued to read the content of the remaining newspapers, and about half of the remaining dozen newspapers reprinted the article. Lamartine suddenly realized the seriousness of the incident. The orientation of newspaper public opinion can affect the orientation of the people of Seine. The purpose of this article is probably not simply to praise what exactly the promoters behind the article want to do. Dang. Dang dang, a short knock on the door pulled Lamartine from the realm of consciousness to reality. Lamartine, who reacted quickly, said, "Please come in." A middle-aged man with a slightly chubby look rushed in and pushed the door. "Mr. Lamartine, you reading www.urkanshu.com on the street." On the street. The flustered look of the middle-aged man made Lamartine's heart squeak. He desperately hoped that the news from Champeaux was not bad news. "Calm down and tell me what happened on the street." Champeaux, after hearing Lamartine's serious words, the man named Champeaux calmed down, as if he had found his backbone, and said, "Sir, when I passed by Place de la Concorde, I saw many demonstrators with banners. Victor Champeaux de Lablé, who became Lamartine's secretary in 1833 and accompanied him on his second trip to the East, died in Marv in 1850. How many are many?" Lamartine asked the secretary in front of him sternly. "About 1,000 people. I don't know the exact number." Champeaux responded to Lamartine. "There are only 1,000 people." Lamartine murmured softly, and he was also relieved in his heart. The 1,000-person parade is still under Lamartine's control, as long as it's not like the February Revolution. What was the slogan of their parade? Maintain the national factory? Guarantee workers' wages? Lamartine continued to ask. No. Champeaux shook his head and responded, "Neither. Their slogan is Long Live Napoleon. We want pardon, and..." Champeaux glanced at Lamartine and said hesitantly, "And the overthrow of the Republic. These Bonapartists." Lamartine gritted his teeth and spat out from his mouth. "Mr. Lamartine, I heard that there are not only parades. Even the army is chanting Long Live Napoleon." Chapter 38, Lobbyist Fears. Damn it. Have those Bonapartists infiltrated the army? Lamartine's veins bulged, and he shouted loudly, clenching his fists. Lamartine, who has experienced the February Revolution, undoubtedly understands that the army plays a pivotal role in the revolution, especially the group of regular troops stationed near Paris, which has the power to determine the existence of the entire revolutionary regime. At the beginning, if the king, referring to Louis Philippe, was not willing to mobilize the army, the Republican regime could not have a foothold in Paris. Louis Philippe ascended the throne of the king with the support of the National Guard. With his weak foundation, he could not win the trust of the army at all. In addition, the Orleans Kingdom's attitude of showing weakness to the European powers during the 18-year period was even more aroused dissatisfaction with the army. This situation was eased when Marshal Soult came to power. However, after the fall of Marshal Soult, Louis Philippe, who lacked a bridge to communicate with the army, was even more unable to trust the army, which led him to reject the foundation in December 1947. In response to the request of mobilizing troops to suppress the banquet movement in the territory, a revolution in February of the following year made Louis Philippe fled Paris in a hurry before he could mobilize the troops. The troops who lost their allegiance could only reluctantly accept the Republic. What would be the fate of the French Republic if the army turned to support the Bonapartists? Lamartine thought anxiously about the future of the Republic. The split between the two classes and the hidden dangers of the army deeply troubled him. What about General Godin? As the commander-in-chief of Paris, he should forbid such a thing. Could it be that he also wants to restore the empire? Lamartine pointed the contradiction to Godin, but he never forgot the Viscount's black history. Viscount Amable Gaspar Henry Godin, 1790-1877, took office during the Empire period in the Restoration dynasty, served as a member of the extreme left from 1842 to 1848, and served as the Paris National Guard after the February Revolution. Commander-in-command of the National Guard of Paris, Sir General Godin, he Champord wanted to say that General Gurdon did not affect the ability of the regular army in Paris, but he was good at observing words and expressions, and he obviously realized that Mr. Lamartine just needed to find an excuse to vent. Chaos. Chaos. All Paris is in chaos. Will they wake up? Only if the Tsar's bayonet is put on France's neck. Lamartine shouted in self-defeating. Lamartine, who was in trouble both at home and abroad, even wondered for a moment whether the establishment of a Republican government was premature. Chambeau could only watch helplessly as Lamartine vented in his study alone. Lamartine, who was venting indiscriminately, regained his composure and asked Chambeau, "Is there any other situation?" "No more." Chambeau resolutely concealed some small things. "That's good. That's good." Lamartine nodded and muttered softly. At this moment, the knock on the door came from the study again. "Come in." Lamartine and Chambeau turned their eyes to the door at the same time. Madame Lamartine emerged from the door. "Hello, madam." Chambeau hurriedly saluted the first lady in front of him. "Mr. Chambord." "Hello." Madame Lamartine raised her head proudly and responded to Chambord. This condescending attitude made Chambeau a little disgusted, but he didn't dare to show the slightest disrespect. Then she turned her eyes to Lamartine and said, "My dear, M. Thiers is here and is downstairs now." "Thiers? What is he doing here?" Lamartine frowned, with a hint of disgust in his expression. A romantic. He did not like Thiers, the political chameleon. Although he has declared himself a Republican, Lamartine, who has been with him for several years, knows that this guy's an egoist at heart. "Mr. Thiers said he can solve your troubles." Madame Lamartine spoke with respect repeatedly, and her attitude towards Thiers was completely different from that of Chambeau. "Then invite him in," Lamartine said to his wife. As a political figure, Lamartine still understands that he must not be influenced by his personal emotions. Not long after, a short, rounded little old man appeared in Lamartine's study. He was the founder of the future Third Republican. Thiers, a scoundrel of the Paris Commune. As soon as he entered the door, Thiers first complimented Lamartine. "Congratulations, Monsieur Lamartine. You are now the most powerful man in the whole of France, among our generation." Referring to the Romantics, "You climbed to the highest position. Perhaps I should call you the ruler, Thiers. I don't need to say compliments. I don't think you came to visit me to say something innocuous. You said that you could help me solve my difficulties. What's the matter?" Lamartine obviously do not eat this set. He said directly, "Your Excellency, now the whole of Paris is like a big volcano. We overthrew His Majesty Louis Philippe, but we had to fight that group of insurgents. I think this will only tear the Republic apart." Talk. Riyadh1.com. Thiers, who is talking shit, said to Lamartine, "Although I'm a member of the Party of Order, I also do not want the Republic to be torn apart again. I'm willing to do my part. Work for the Republic, Mr. Thiers. What do you think should be done in the present situation?" Lamartine asked Thiers. "I was also appointed by His Majesty Louis Philippe as a steward of the country for several years." Thiers said modestly, "I also encountered your situation in 1840. My solution at that time was you must know something too. After that, you stepped down." Lamartine retorted immediately. Thiers spread his hands and said helplessly, "I cannot defy your Majesty's will. When the country needs me, I stand up. When the country does not need me, I throw it aside like a scrapped machine." After that, I understood a truth. A harmless idol helps maintain the whole stability. But we don't have Napoleon anymore. Lamartine's attitude softened. "Napoleon is a flag. We only need a figure close to Napoleon, and we can make him a deity." Thiers said in a daze. Lamartine instantly understood what Thiers meant. He looked at Thiers suspiciously. Thiers didn't know when he got involved with the Bonapartists, but Thiers' scheme was indeed a way of de-escalating the contradiction. "Do you, the Party of Order, think so too?" Lamartine tentatively asked for the Party of Order suggestion. Thiers remembered the original promise of Bonapartist Huguenot. He nodded and said, "Of course." Chapter 39, Huguenot MP. "Let me think about it again, too." raise another Bonaparte on the throne, did help to ease the class contradictions in the whole of France, especially to help the army recognize the Republican government, even if this recognition is always unreliable at a critical moment. In fact, the actions of the French army during the three dynasties have confirmed this, but Lamartine still wants to win over knowing that the army is unreliable. In some non-critical moments, the military's position will make the foundation of the government more solid. However, in view of what Louis Napoleon did during the Orleans dynasty, Lamartine still had some disgust with Louis Napoleon in his heart. It is the greatest irony of the Republic to lift a restorer to the holy throne of the Republic. Government, there is not much time left for us now. Thiers reminded kindly, I heard that those insurgents have begun to plan a second uprising. Thiers' words sounded a wake-up call in Lamartine's heart. The Republican government really doesn't have much time. Mr. Thiers, thank you for your visit today. Lamartine expressed his thanks again to Thiers afterwards. Lamartine ordered Thiers to be expelled. Mr. Thiers, I will seriously consider your suggestion. Now I have some meetings to go, so I won't leave you here. Of course. Thiers shrugged his shoulders and said nonchalantly, Mr. Governor needs to worry about the fate of the whole of France. It's really hard work. I don't know if it was Lamartine's illusion, but in Thiers' words, Lamartine could hear a bit of sarcasm. Under the leadership of Chambord, Thiers walked out of Lamartine's mansion. When he parted, Thiers did not forget to instruct Chambord, Mr. Chambord, please take good care of M. Lamartine. The French Republic put M. Lamartine in the role of governing, and M. Lamartine also brought Mr. Lamartine with him. Unprecedented pressure. If this pressure cannot be turned into motivation, it will only crush Mr. Lamartine completely. Who said no? Mr. Champeau nodded and said, since the establishment of the Republic, the government has not slept peacefully for a long time. Trust me, governing will soon be able to sleep well. Thiers said with an inscrutable smile. I hope so. Chambord obviously did not understand what Thiers meant. He was so intent on making Lamartine the first official president that he had no idea that a conspiracy was quietly brewing. A black carriage appeared in front of Thiers, while Thiers stepped into the carriage and said goodbye to Champeau. Then I'll go first. Champeau also politely regretted Thiers' departure. When his eyes swept across the carriage inadvertently, he saw a pair of black boots in the carriage. There should be another person in the carriage. The carriage door was closed. The coachman lightly reined in the reins, and the horses that received the signal slowly drove away from Lamartine's apartment. Monsieur Thiers, we meet again. As Champeau had guessed, there were indeed people in the carriage of the carriage. Member Rouet. Thiers also politely called out the name of the person opposite him. Eugen Rouet, French lawyer and politician, Bonapartist, member of the Constituent Assembly and Legislative Assembly during the Second Republic, 1848 to 1849, Minister of Justice intermittently from 1849 to 1852. He supported Louis Napoleon Bonaparte and boycotted the left-wing opposition. In 1850, he proposed to cancel the general election plan. In 1852, he was responsible for drafting the constitution of the Second French Empire. Thiers knew that the Rouet senator, who was only in his 30s, was a Bonapartist, and his rank was not low among the Bonapartists. Mr. Thiers, thank you for your support of the Bonaparte faction. Eugene Rouet expressed his verbal thanks to Thiers. Mr. Senator, needless to say that kind of cheap verbal thanks. Thiers also opened the door and said, the reason why I help you is because you can bring me corresponding benefits. If the brat behind you can't bring me sufficient benefits, I will abandon you without hesitation. Thiers' blatantly overbearing proclamation did not cause any emotional waves from Eugen Rouet. The lawyer, who is only 34 years old, but has a mature politician's mansion, still said with a smile, it is our honor that Mr. Thiers is willing to support us. We are also willing to do everything we can to help Mr. Thiers. If you really want to abandon us, we have no complaints. This is your right as the leader of the party. But, Lawyer Rouet's tone changed from soft to stern, and his expression became more ferocious. You really want to see those revolutionaries destroying the entire country, and those hateful rioters ride on the we are in awe. Not only do they want to seize power, they want to confiscate our property. We have worked so hard for decades to earn it. Thiers was of course unwilling. From the moment he entered Paris, He had already decided to infiltrate the upper class of Paris and become a man who was admired by everyone. It took him more than 30 years and several trials of life and death to get to where he is now. Those rioters actually wanted to loot everything from him through a revolution. This is absolutely not allowed. You should understand that I'm not the only one who chooses you. Thiers still seemed unmoved. I know you will choose an executioner. He will take charge of France and then wipe out all those mobs. Huguenot said with a natural expression. The executioner should be a member of the army. Thiers' expression changed slightly. He glanced at Huguenot with gloomy eyes. Mr. Thiers, please don't look at me like that. Ruby spread her hands and said innocently, France has become a mess now, and we can only rely on the army to solve this chaotic situation. Soldiers will be one of the best. With a sharp knife, it will cut out a tumor called riot. I admit that you are right. We, referring to the Party of Order, do have this idea. Thiers frankly admitted the conspiracy of the Party of Order. Only the army can extinguish the flame of this revolution. Mr. Thiers, have you ever thought about a leader of the army? If you suppress the mob today, will he turn his bayonet on the National Assembly tomorrow? And what means will the National Assembly use to stop Napoleon at that time? Huguenot asked. Chapter 40. Come to an agreement. Thiers was obviously lost in thought by Huguenot's question. The Party of Order does have the need and the ability to support a military leader, but who can guarantee that those warriors will not have undeserved ambitions like Napoleon of the Year, who was also recognized as the son of the revolution before usurping the throne. At first, he just wanted to have a place in Paris, and now he is only one step away from the center of power. A leader who is capable and determined, and who is also supported by the army, may not necessarily obey the orders of the National Assembly. Rouet said while the iron was hot. Your power in the army is not small. Thiers retorted with a cold snort. Which of the generals entrenched in France was not the one who followed the emperor to fight in the east and west? They were infinite to the emperor. Reverence, more than 30 years is not enough time to replace a generation. As Thiers said, the officers who started with the emperor in those days have now grown into generals. Rouet was the one who saw Bonaparte's potential in the French army before he resolutely joined Bonaparte. The key to the existence of a regime lies in the stability of the regime and the attitude of the army. As long as the army does not object, then this regime can go and exist. Point in the presence of Thiers, Rouet could only play down Bonaparte's influence on the army. He said to Thiers in an exaggerated Parisian accent, Mr. Thiers, does our army have loyalty? The emperor is destroyed. They can take refuge in the Bourbons with peace of mind. The Republic is coming, and they leave the Bourbons and turn to the Republic. Loyalty is worthless to them. They only care if they can get enough from the rebellion interests. Thiers also felt the same in his heart. The French army only cared about its own pockets. In other words, whoever can lead them out to rob, they will obey their orders. If they can't lead them on an expedition, they will abandon the regime without hesitation. That's why Louis Philippe failed. At the beginning, he wanted to learn from that His Majesty who led the army to loot, but unfortunately it fell short. In 1840, he was forced to resign on October 29, 1840 due to the intervention of Britain, Russia, Prussia, and Austria due to his tough attitude in supporting Muhammad Ali against Turkey. Perhaps what you said makes sense. Thiers' hands trembled slightly because of his emotions, and his tone became more serious. Then what are your interests, Mr. Thiers? Rouet's expression also became serious. He knew that it was a critical moment of confrontation. I heard that, after you left office, you urged the construction of the Tier City Wall. It was really a great project. Wall of Thiers. In order to appease the frustrated Thiers, Louis Philippe handed over the task of building the city wall of Paris to Thiers with full supervision. The task took 3 years, and faced a huge amount of deficit and corruption in the middle. Question. Louis Philippe did not ask. It is generally believed that Thiers was involved in corruption and fraud in this city wall issue, creating a deficit. Thiers instantly understood the purpose of the greedy Bonapartist Huguenot. 4 years is enough for them to spend a long time. Thiers was not afraid of corruption by these Bonapartists, but he was afraid that these fellows were not corrupt. Guys who are not corrupt tend to seek bigger things. What a bunch of greedy guys. Thiers secretly scorned in his heart, but still said, of course, that was the project I personally supervised. We also imagine Mr. Thiers supervising a project that can benefit the whole of France. Raoult said with a face full of greed, everything is for France, yes. Everything is for France. Thiers also showed a sly smile. In his heart the threat of Bonapartists had been minimized. Besides, M. Thiers, our leader, is only 26 years old, and he doesn't have enough prestige in France. He must rely on good politicians like you to check. Eugen Raoult continued to draw the cakes at Thiers. Don't you, the Bonapartists, have any complaints? Thiers retorted, we, the Bonapartists, will merge with you, the Party of Order, said Raoult to Thiers. On behalf of our Party of Order, I welcome you to join us. Thiers was very moved by Raoult's pie. Jerome Bonaparte's age and qualifications became his shortcomings and his strengths. Then, our proposal? Rouet asked Thiers with a smile on his face. We will try our best to promote the return of Prince Louis Napoleon. You will need yourselves for the rest of the election. I believe you will be able to do it. Thiers made the most regrettable decision of his life May 8, 1848. The petition action of the Chartist movement lasted for 3 days. During these 3 days, the British government turned its tolerant attitude towards the Charterists and attacked the Charterists. Hundreds of Chartist leaders and workers were arrested, and small and medium-sized leftist newspapers were banned. The Polaris, the largest of the left-wing newspapers, also received a stern warning from the United Kingdom government. But the Polaris can ignore this. Even if they have been verbally warned, they still continue to criticize the United Kingdom government. Sandy-mapped articles headlined Bonapartism appeared in the Polaris, among other left-wing newspapers. Louis Bonaparte was for a time known to the workers and gentlemen all over London and the counties around London. Some guys who knew Louis Napoleon also ate human blood buns, and they also advertised Louis Napoleon's great achievements in the United Kingdom, as if Louis Napoleon was born to save the United Kingdom. It's just that, when they preached great achievements, they didn't forget to bring themselves. There are even some guys with ulterior motives demonstrating in the United Kingdom with the slogan "We want our parlance." Jerome Bonaparte hoped that the public opinion offensive of the times was completed by accident in the hands of Polaris. Even Jerome Bonaparte, who was in the detention center, couldn't help but sigh after hearing the news. I still underestimated the power of left-wing newspapers. The United Kingdom government had to think about eliminating the sudden rise in the United Kingdom's reverence for Bonaparte, and what to do with Jerome Bonaparte, who was imprisoned in the London Metropolitan Police District. Chapter 41. Prime Minister Russell. May 11, 1848. A black carriage with gilt trim and windows covered by a curtain of dark blue crepe was dragged by 2 tall brown-yellow horses out of London and headed for Windsor Castle in Berkshire County, southeastern England. As soon as the carriage left London, it galloped down a country road paved with gravel and cement. The slightly bumpy road was flanked by emerald green lawns, where cattle and sheep strolled leisurely in groups. The little shepherd lay leisurely on the lawn and looked up at the blue sky that had not been eroded by industrialization. There are rows of houses in the distance, and there are repeated cooking smoke rising above some houses. If you listen to the wind, you can hear the bells of the church in the distance. Compared with the industrialized London, the countryside, the time seems to be stuck in the Middle Ages. The true portrayal of the dualistic social system of the city and the countryside is vividly displayed in the United Kingdom in the 19th century, where you can't feel the breath of industrialization at all, and you can't feel the sour thinking that permeates the air. Less than PM 2.5 white dust. The countryside full of environmentalism has also become the private plot of many aristocrats. The owner of the carriage was Lord Russell. At this time, he was staring at the scenery outside the window through the dark blue curtain. The rural scenery did not make Lord Russell feel comfortable, but the dark blue eyes revealed that endless worries. The vigorous petition movement of the Chartist movement made Lord Russell exhausted. During this period of time, he had to accept inquiries from the property owners in the House of Representatives, and at the same time, tried to eliminate the influence of the petition movement. Russell knew that there were some ministers and MPs in the cabinet in the House who secretly accused themselves of being weak to the mob, and claimed that the original Lord Russell should not have agreed to the bill, referring to the 10-hour work system. For such phenomena, Lord Russell can only choose to hide it, because he understands that, even if he loses his temper in the House of Lords, it will not solve the current problem. Besides, a patchwork cabinet in Parliament really can't stand the big toss, or it may face the temporary collapse of the cabinet like the last time, and the mob seized the opportunity to force the government to sign the conditions that the government was unwilling to sign. The lessons of the fall of the previous cabinet gave Lord Russell an unforgettable memory. This time he is going to accept an inquiry from Windsor Castle. To be precise, an inquiry from Prince Albert Point. Since the start of the petition movement, Victoria, who originally lived in Buckingham Palace, followed the lesson of the unfortunate Louis XVI next door during the Great Revolution, and the family urgently moved out of Buckingham Palace to Windsor Castle Point after the carriage carrying the political heads of the most powerful countries in the world traveled for about 4 hours. The speed of the carriage slowly slowed down. "Your Excellency, we are here." The reminder from the coachman made Lord Russell, who was about to fall asleep, open his eyes. Through the window curtain, Lord Russell saw a castle. The castle was surrounded by a layer of walls more than 6 or 7 meters high. Choked the London waterways. Located in the east and north of the castle is an open terraced terrain with a wide field of vision, which was a strategic location in the Middle Ages. Now that Britain dominates the whole world, this strategic location has become a decoration. Led by the Royal Guards, the carriage slowly entered the core area through the Norman Gate and stopped in front of a castle point with John Brown on standby. Lord Russell entered a study in the castle. "The Prince and His Majesty will be here soon. His Excellency the Prime Minister can wait a moment." John Brown saluted Lord Russell and left. There was only Lord Russell left in the study. Lord Russell knew that it must be a conspiracy from Albert. That guy from Germany was never a fuel efficient lamp. Minutes and seconds passed, and there was also a wave in Lord Russell's calm heart. The study slowly opened, and Prince Albert and Queen Victoria appeared in bright red military uniforms. "Your Majesty, Your Majesty." Lord Russell got up and bowed his head to Albert, taking a hint of flattery. "Your Excellency Prime Minister." Prince Albert slightly to the Lord. Victoria and Albert sat on one side of the sofa, and Lord Russell sat opposite Prince Albert. "Your Excellency Prime Minister, we called you here today just to ask about the recent situation in London." Albert asked Lord Russell casually. "The mob in the London area has disappeared under the joint suppression of the police and vigilantes. London has not suffered too much impact, and the City Hall and the Cabinet are all running well." Lord Russell hurriedly reported to Albert. "So, can we go back to London?" Prince Albert asked again. "I'm afraid not yet." Lord Russell shook his head and responded. "Your Excellency Prime Minister, didn't you say that the mob has disappeared?" Prince Albert asked, pretending not to know. "The newspapers headed by the Polaris are still attacking the government, and the royal family's rash presence in London may cause some unnecessary disputes." Lord Russell said politely. At this time, London residents did not know that the royal family ran from Buckingham Palace to Windsor Castle overnight. If you let them know, I'm afraid that the mobs will directly point their finger at the royal family. Then, just ban them all. Queen Victoria said bluntly. "Your Majesty, this is not in line with the rules of the United Kingdom." Lord Russell explained patiently. "If you rush to ban www.riyadh1.com, I'm afraid it will cause the situation to escalate." And Lord Russell glanced at Albert and said hesitantly, "Many newspapers use the name of Bonaparte to attack the government and the royal family in Bonaparte." "Mr. Russell, do you mean that the royal family condoned Bonaparte to attack the government?" Albert said, a little displeased. "I can guarantee that no matter what happens, the royal family has no reason to go against the government's policy." "Could it be that Bonaparte made an assertion?" Lord Russell asked again. "I don't know about that," Albert responded. "The royal family is not Mr. Bonaparte's nanny, and we have no obligation to take care of him from time to time." "Then, what should I do with Mr. Bonaparte, who is being held in detention?" Lord Russell asked again. Bonaparte was actually imprisoned? Albert asked in confusion. Did he not reveal his identity? In the London detention centre, only poor ghosts can be detained, but gentlemen cannot be detained. Not to mention high-class nobles like Bonaparte. "No," Lord Russell said helplessly. This slick Prince Albert cursed in German. In his opinion, Jerome Bonaparte was using this method to keep himself out of public opinion. So, are we going to let him go? Lord Russell asked again. Then, everything should be done in accordance with the laws of the United Kingdom. Albert said drippingly. I remember that the period of detention is 1 week. Let him stay there honestly. The conclusion of Jerome Bonaparte's acquittal set the tone in a few words between Prime Minister Russell and Albert. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 42, Public Opinion Layout. Inside the London Metropolitan Police Detention Unit, Jerome Bonaparte, who had been detained by the fat sheriff for nearly a week on charges of disturbing the peace, was half lying in a cot in the detention center, flipping through a book called Eradication of Poverty in his hands. Next to it are other articles such as The Thought of Bonaparte. These books and articles became the spiritual food of Jerome Bonaparte. During his week in detention, Jerome Bonaparte used to read these books, which incorporated all the thoughts of his cousin, Louis Napoleon. Wisdom has a further understanding. A member of the arrogant aristocracy of the 19th century, his cousin was among the first to realize that the French throne was closely related to the quality of life of the French people. The Keynesian spectre that drove the economy saw the idea of using universal suffrage to overwhelm the French people, and the reverence for the Prussian service system points. Just that I don't know why Louis Napoleon in history did not implement the idea of a 3-level military service system like Prussia. If the cousin can be like what he says in his book, with a population of 35 million, France can mobilize nearly 1.5 million troops to crush Prussia. It's hard for Jerome to imagine how his cousin figured out these things in prison. Perhaps only the word genius is the best evaluation for my cousin. Jerome, who had been flipping through the pages for a long time, rubbed his dry eyes, only to hear the sound of the prison door opening from outside the door. Jerome raised his head and looked at the prison door. Pesini in a shiflak dress and coat appeared in the detention center. In the room, beside him was a prison guard in a black uniform. The prison guard nodded and bowed to Pesini that he could be called at any time if needed. Pesini nodded slightly, took out a gold coin from the capital, and handed it to the prison guard. The prison guard who took the gold coin left the detention center cell with a smile on his face. In the empty cell, only Jerome Bonaparte and Pesini were left. Your Highness, where is your friend? Pesini pointed to the empty cot opposite Jerome Bonaparte and asked, Mr. McGrath has been fished out. He is resting at home now. Jerome Bonaparte flicked the dust in his hand and responded calmly to Pesini. His Royal Highness, then why are you still here? Aren't you going to return to France? Pesini looked at Jerome Bonaparte suspiciously. He didn't understand why Jerome Bonaparte sent himself to prison. What does the operation mean, Pesini? I ask you. How is the situation outside now? Jerome Bonaparte asked Pesini as he got up and sat on the ground for push-ups. Those left-wing newspapers attacked the government of the United Kingdom like crazy, and they even attacked the government in the name of His Majesty. Pesini calmly responded to Jerome Bonaparte's inquiry. Then, our goal has been achieved. Jerome Bonaparte snapped his fingers and asked again, Pesini, let me ask you one more thing. What does France, especially Paris, think of the answer? What else can you think? Of course it's hatred. Pesini responded without hesitation. If you want to say who in the whole of Europe hates the answer people the most, then the Gauls are at the top of the list. From the 100 Years' War to selling oneself to aid the United States, and then to the anti-French war, the blood feud between the two nations of Answer and Gaul can no longer be measured by the number of times hate-ridden, not to mention that after the Industrial Revolution, the impact of the products of the United Kingdom on the local French industry has further aroused the hatred of the French industrial bourgeoisie towards the Anza nation. From the top to the bottom, almost all the French are secretly and silently cursing the country on the other side of the strait. Think about whether the news of Bonaparte's successor being held in the detention center by the Answer spread to France. Would it arouse the sympathy of the French people for the Bonaparte family? Jerome Bonaparte stroked with his lower jaw. He said briskly, "Of course we still need a few enthusiastic reporters to report in France." The content of the report is, Mr. Jerome Bonaparte, the upright, can't bear to see the tyrannical police of the United Kingdom oppressing gentlemen, so he helped, and was eventually imprisoned in a cell. Then some gossip circulated on the streets of Paris. Jerome Bonaparte helped, because he spoke out to the workers. This Pessinny expressed surprise at Jerome Bonaparte's use of public opinion manipulation, but he still had some concerns. Is this really not going to be discovered? In case anyone doubts, Jerome Bonaparte engraved the word truth in simplified Chinese on the wall with his fingernails. Pessinny, is the so-called truth really that important? People will only believe what they say, what they are willing to believe. As for the truth or not, they are too lazy to delve into it. They will only believe that what they guess is the truth. Jerome Bonaparte in the information society of later generations has seen too many cases of spreading rumors. Riyadh1.com refuting rumors and breaking their legs. The truth or falsehood of information is not a matter for the people to dig into. A ruling class that is good at leading public opinion is a qualified ruling class, and publish this letter in the Times. Jerome Bonaparte handed the already written article to Pessinny. Pessinny took over the letter from Jerome Bonaparte. The content of the letter was, on behalf of myself and the Bonaparte family, I would like to express to the Polaris and the Times of London, waiting for the newspapers to file lawsuits. Recently, the content of these newspapers is a distortion of Bonaparte's thinking and the emperor's thinking. The Bonaparte family has the right to file a lawsuit against the newspaper. The core idea of the letter is to prohibit left-wing newspapers from attacking the government in the name of Bonaparte, and at the same time, apologize to the Bonaparte family. By the way, there is also a tactful apology to McGrath in my personal name. Of course, after this article is published. If McGrath asks, don't say anything. Jerome Bonaparte remind Pessinny again. I see. Pessinny instantly understood Jerome Bonaparte's intentions. While showing goodwill to the United Kingdom, he did not forget to show his favor to the left-wing newspaper, so as not to become the target of public criticism. After this farce is over, we can leave and return to France. Jerome Bonaparte sat down again and said, is there any latest news from France? There is news from France that the Bonapartists in France have persuaded Lamartine that Lamartine will send a special envoy to discuss with you about His Majesty's return to China. Chapter 43. Leave the detention center. May 13th, 1848. A public lawsuit was published in the Times, which demanded that left-wing newspapers stop insulting Emperor Bonaparte and apologize for insulting Emperor Bonaparte and damaging the reputation of the Bonaparte family. At the same time that the Times published its lawsuit, almost every government-leaning newspaper in London published news about the Bonaparte family demanding an apology from left-wing newspapers. Not to be outdone, the left-wing newspapers also fought back, claiming that the authenticity of the lawsuit remains to be examined. Pessinny secretly went to McGrath's residence, expressed half-truths and apologized and left. McGrath believes that the lawsuit was probably written under the pressure of the coalition government. The Times also claimed that the lawsuit is true and reliable. For a time, the attention of the entire public opinion circle in London shifted from the suppression of the Charterists to the authenticity of the Bonaparte. The United Kingdom lawsuit government, which successfully diverted the public's attention, quickly wiped out the follow-up of the Charterists' petition movement. Jerome Bonaparte was also told that he was acquitted and could leave the detention facility at any time. London Metropolitan Police District Detention Unit. The Metropolitan Police Commissioner appeared with a smile on his face and congratulated Jerome Bonaparte in the detention center where Jerome Bonaparte was. Prince Jerome, you can leave now. Jerome Bonaparte put down the Bonaparte thought in his hand and said to the police minister with a look of surprise, Dear Mr. Minister, which law of the United Kingdom did I break that led me to be imprisoned? A week. I hope you can explain it to me. The police commissioner was at a loss for words. According to the Police Act and Administration of Public Order Act of the United Kingdom, Jerome Bonaparte did not engage in subversive work, so his detention is no longer valid. The Minister of Police could not explain directly to Jerome Bonaparte that the order to imprison him was directly determined by the Minister of the Interior. Of course, the Minister of Police did not know that the source of the order was not the Home Secretary, and Prime Minister Russell and Prince Albert of Buckingham Palace discussed and determined it. Otherwise, he would not dare to speak nonsense. You didn't tell your real name at the time, so the police commissioner could only explain intermittently. What? Jerome Bonaparte pretended to exaggerately covered his mouth and said with an expression of disbelief, "Is the laws of the United Kingdom formulated according to the background of identity? This is a union that symbolizes freedom kingdom. No, no. The United Kingdom is a country that obeys the law, and all our rules and regulations are carried out in accordance with the laws of the United Kingdom." The Commissioner of Police immediately realized the loophole in his words and deeds and hurriedly remedied. Point. Although the United Kingdom follows the unspoken rules of not punishing the nobles and complimenting the mob, the unspoken rules are destined to be unspoken rules, and sometimes face projects still need to be done. Otherwise, the so-called civilized Europe would be nothing more than a savage Slav. Then, Mr. Commissioner, Jerome Bonaparte pretended to be arrogant and pointed at the Commissioner of the Police Department. "If you can't give me a reasonable explanation, I have the right to file a lawsuit with the Metropolitan Police Department. I believe there must be many honest lawyers and journalist friends in the United Kingdom willing to accept my case." If Jerome Bonaparte's blatant threats to the Minister of Police are placed on any ordinary person, then he will only disappear on the streets of London one day. But while the Bonaparte surname brought him unparalleled influence, it also indirectly gave him a gold medal. No government in the 19th century could physically exterminate the royal family, even if Bonaparte's royal family was nothing more than a fake paper tiger. All the government can do is either put them in captivity, similar to what Louis Philippe did to Louis Napoleon, or Metternich to the King of Rome, or out of sight, out of mind and out of the country. Both of these rights require the consent of the highest levels of the UK government. His little police chief obviously does not have such great abilities. He, the police minister, has the power of life and death in London and several nearby counties, to put it nicely. In fact, his power is not as good as that of a member of parliament in the fringe area. He has reason to believe that once Jerome Bonaparte initiates a lawsuit against the police department, those London journalists who run faster than anyone else will definitely stay out of the day and night to guard themselves. What's more, now the United Kingdom urgently needs to find a way to divert attention. Once he is guarded by those dog-like reporters, he may be forced to sacrifice for the United Kingdom. Not to mention, whether the post of police commissioner can be kept, there is still the risk of going to prison. What exactly do you want to do? The police commissioner lowered his eyebrows and asked in a weak tone. You reading www or can't you come fair? Fair. Still fair. Jerome Bonaparte pointed to the wall of the detention center with a sonorous force and said, "Who let me in? I'll let him in now." The Commissioner of Police did not respond. Those sullen eyes kept rolling. He was weighing the pros and cons after a while. The police commissioner stomped his foot gently, and he seemed to have a firm conviction. "Okay, I agree to your terms." After that, the police commissioner turned around and yelled at the secretary behind him, "Call me that stupid pig." The secretary instantly understood what the director meant. He turned around and trotted away. After another half an hour, the secretary returned again, this time followed by a fat man who looked like a mourning concubine. This fat man was the arrogant sheriff that day. "Mr. Sheriff, we meet again." Jerome Bonaparte greeted the fat sheriff kindly with a smile. "Dear, Your Excellency." The fat sheriff looked at Jerome Bonaparte with pleading eyes and said, "I beg you, forgive my disrespect." Jerome Bonaparte shook his head in disappointment and said, "Mr. Sheriff, everyone is responsible for what he does. You and I are no exception." Then, his eyes hinted at the director. The minister stepped forward to announce the order of dismissal to the fat sheriff and detained him in the former residence of Jerome Bonaparte. "Goodbye, Mr. Former Sheriff. That's my gift to you. I hope you can study well in prison, Jerome." Bonaparte points to the elimination of poverty and the thought of Bonaparte waving out of the prison cell. A prince was sent away from the cell and a former sheriff was ushered in. Chapter 44, Home Trivia. Accompanied by the enthusiasm of the Minister of Police, Jerome Bonaparte strolled out of the detention center. Outside the detention center, a carriage with the Bonaparte emblem was parked on the side of the road. "Mr. Minister, I hope to see you next time." Jerome Bonaparte stretched out his hand to say goodbye to the Minister of Police. The police commissioner, who hoped to never meet Jerome Bonaparte in his heart, said politely, "I hope we can continue to meet again next time." The two hands were released in reluctance, and Jerome Bonaparte turned and walked towards Fleury, His Royal Highness. Fleury asked after saluting Jerome Bonaparte, "They didn't do anything to you, did they?" Jerome patted his dusty trousers lightly and said in a calm tone, "Our value to the United Kingdom now determines the upper limit of his tolerance for us, as long as the London superstructure doesn't attack us. Those little asterisk how dare you do anything? Let's go. Go home." Jerome opened the door and entered the carriage, and Fleury sat in the driver's seat of the carriage. The carriage carrying Jerome crossed several main roads and soon came to the Louis mansion. In front of the Louis mansion, Fleury, who was tightening the reins, shouted to Jerome Bonaparte, who was drowsy in the carriage, "His Royal Highness, we are going home. Huh? Are you back?" Jerome Bonaparte yawned, opened his sleepy eyes, and got out of the car. From the outside, the Louis mansion is not much different from before. Jerome Bonaparte walked up the steps slowly and pushed the door into the mansion. "Your Highness, welcome back," almost. The moment Jerome Bonaparte stepped into the mansion, a loud and neat sound of celebration came from the mansion. Jerome Bonaparte looked at the source of the sound, and he found that the people in the mansion also looked at Jerome Bonaparte in unison. A smile appeared on Pessini's face, and tears welled up in Tyrann's eyes. Jerome Bonaparte saw loyalty in their faces. This is the charm of Bonaparte. After Jerome Bonaparte embraced Tyrannus and the other Bonapartists with open arms, he said lightly, "Everyone, I'm back. Let's finish our unfinished business. Long live the Empire. Long live the Empire." Under Pessini's lead, everyone was chanting "Long live the Empire." After a brief exhilaration, Jerome Bonaparte branched off other members of the Bonaparte party, leaving only Persigny. "Persigny, there is news from France." Jerome Bonaparte, who was sitting on the sofa leaning forward at a 30-degree angle, immediately asked Persigny, "According to the report of our Bonapartist member Hugues Rouard in France, Lamartine, the head of the government of the Second Republic, has sent a special envoy to discuss with us the matter of bringing back His Majesty's body." Roma Bonaparte reports, "It is Persigny's wish to win Louis Napoleon back to France as a hero, and now he is getting closer and closer to realizing this wish. Mr. Rouard did a great job." Jerome Bonaparte nodded in satisfaction, and M. Rouard is in a letter to plead guilty to you. Persigny continued. "Huh?" Jerome Bonaparte looked at Persigny in confusion and asked half jokingly, "Do we, the Rouard deputies, despise him for not doing enough?" "No, it's not." After a moment of hesitation, Persigny said through gritted teeth, "Root said in the letter that, in order to make the plan go smoothly, he ordered the party without your consent. Thiers has reached an agreement." Afterwards, Persigny added in a low voice, "Listen to Rouard, this time, regarding the matter of welcoming back His Majesty's body. Thiers also made great efforts." "Thiers?" Jerome Bonaparte frowned and muttered in a low voice with a serious expression. No one knows Thiers better than Jerome Bonaparte, the former Prime Minister of Orleans, who has the dual characteristics of chameleon and ruthless. In the historical line 18 years later, referring to Jerome Bonaparte, the historical line obeys previous life, as the image of the executioner of the Paris Commune is deeply rooted in the hearts of the people. This 19th century pride of heaven has only lost in the game with his cousin in his life, and that game was caused by his careless underestimation of his cousin. Jerome can't guarantee that he, who is familiar with history, can win the old fox. I hope that the conditions that Rouet promised are not too outrageous. Jerome prayed silently in his heart. Now that things have happened, the most important thing is to find countermeasures as much as possible. What conditions did Rouet agree to? Thiers? Jerome Bonaparte's tone was no longer as light as before, but more solemn. The atmosphere of the whole room also became solemn with the tone of Jerome Bonaparte. Persigny swallowed and looked at the face that was 50% similar to Emperor Napoleon. Whenever he looked at this face, Persigny felt an inexplicable pressure. Riyadh1.com. Now he could only bite the bullet and tell Rouet the conditions. He had agreed to Thiers to form a cabinet of the Party of Order, to be their marionette. After listening to the conditions, Jerome Bonaparte showed an absurd expression. "That's right. Pessany swallowed again and tried to explain, "Your Highness, as long as we can sit in the president's seat, then we can." Before Pessany could finish speaking, Jerome Bonaparte immediately stood up, patted his thigh lightly, and said, "Okay. Raoult did a great job. Your Highness, are you alright?" Pessany looked at Jerome Bonaparte cautiously, for fear that Jerome Bonaparte might not be mentally normal. "Nothing." Jerome Bonaparte took a deep breath and forced himself to calm down. "There is no coincidence in the book, but I didn't expect that this Giroux solved a big problem for himself by accident. At the beginning, my cousin was directly overturned by his car because he was despised by Thiers. In this generation, Thiers is still a dog who can't stop despising himself. The old fox in Thiers is probably proud of being able to control himself now. Just let you be proud for a few months, and when the dust of the presidential election is settled, I will send you all to the sky one by one." Jerome Bonaparte gave Pessany a few words of encouragement and handed a 100,000 franc note to Pessany as a reward for Pessany and the party members in France. The London dockyard on the Thames at this time. A ship sailing from Calais to London is slowly approaching the dock. In the cabin, Tocqueville, who was writing quickly, stopped his work and looked at the London pier outside the cabin window. Chapter 45. Tocqueville and London. Dang dang dang. A crisp knock on the door awakened Tocqueville, who was picking up his work notes. He raised his head and glanced at the oak door and responded calmly, "Please come in." The door made of oak slowly opened, a green face appeared at the door, and he carried a file bag made of cowhide and said respectfully, "Mr. Tocqueville, we should disembark." "I see, Lael." Tocqueville nodded and continued to pack the remaining items into his luggage. Lael hurried to Tocqueville to help Tocqueville clean up. Afterwards, carrying Tocqueville's luggage on his shoulders, the two walked back and forth along the stairs in the cabin to the plywood. The sailboat slowly anchored at one of the docks, and Tocqueville and Lael, led by the sailors, jumped into a small boat and left the sailboat. The boat carried Tocqueville and Lael across the river and came to the berth closest to the sailboat point. Tocqueville, who had both feet on the land of the United Kingdom, looked at the thick white smoke from the smoke exhaust in the distance, and his eyes were full of praise. In his view, it is because of the free trade that the United Kingdom promotes that the United Kingdom can move forward at an unparalleled speed. France, which has been in political chaos for more than 30 years, has fallen a lot. They must catch up to keep from being left behind. As a conservative revolutionary, Tocqueville also envied the United Kingdom's political system in the past, but now he believes that the new French Republic will be able to catch up with the United Kingdom. As Tocqueville's interim secretary, Lael looked around as he set foot on United Kingdom soil for the first time. For him, this country, which has had a great hatred with France for hundreds of years, is worthy of in-depth observation and understanding. If there is a chance, he also wants to write a book that can make a sensation in Paris, like Mr. Tocqueville. At that time, the door of the same high society will naturally open to Lallet. Without Lallet doing it himself. There are only two ways to enter the upper class in the 19th century. One is a born noble or a wealthy person who has struggled for several generations. Article and become a guest of the salon. After entering the attention of the upper class, he became a member of the parliament and established himself completely in the upper class. However, these are just short-lived ambitions of Lallet. The most important thing now is to follow Mr. Tocqueville to the necessary destination and then successfully complete the task. You must know that this job was a hard-earned job for him. If it weren't for his father, a lawyer who happened to be familiar with Mr. Tocqueville, his mother was a noble lady, and he happened to be an intern in the diplomatic service, this job would not be possible at all into his hands. A Paris with a radish and a pit has no extra space for him at all. He has to asterisk all the resources that can be snatched. Lallet once again remembered what his lawyer father had told him before he left. If circumstances permit, try to contact the Bonaparte family. Lallet. Lael. Mr. Tocqueville's voice aroused Lael from his memory. After regaining his senses, Lael hurriedly apologized to Tocqueville. "I'm really sorry. This is my first time in Britain. Don't you think it's very shocking?" Tocqueville was not angry because of Lael's distraction. With a smile, he walked to Lael's face and gently pressed his arm on Lael's shoulder. When I first arrived here, I was also shocked by everything here, but I have always believed that with our efforts, France will be like Britain. Tocqueville stared firmly at the slowly falling sunset in the distance. I believe it too. Lael didn't have the idea of saving the country and the people like Tocqueville. Then, Lale asked a realistic question. Mr. Tocqueville, where are we going now? Do we still have to visit the United Kingdom's Foreign Affairs Department? No. Tocqueville shook his head, with a hint of complaint in his tone. We came to the United Kingdom to talk to the Bonaparte family under the order of the Lamartine administration, and other things are not out of our control. Then shall we go now? Lael asked again. No. Tocqueville rejected. Let's find a place to live now, and then go to the Bonaparte family's mansion in the United Kingdom. Lale and Tocqueville called a carriage outside the pier and told the coachman they were going to a hotel near King St James Street in London's West End. The two who negotiated the price got into the carriage, and the carriage carried them through the downtown area of East London. In the downtown area, Tocqueville was surprised to find that many police officers who only existed in the West District actually appeared in the East District. Riyadh1.com. They were holding muskets and gathered in groups. This phenomenon is really rare. Could it be that there have also been riots in London? Tocqueville, who was on the boat, did not know about the petition movement of the Charterists, but this did not prevent him from making reasonable inferences based on the existing situation. The messy barricades on the bridge further confirmed Tocqueville's conjecture as the carriage passed London Bridge at the junction of the East and West. Is not even Britain spared. Tocqueville mourns the future between the two classes in the French Republic. Across London Bridge is the West End. The carriage passed through St Martin's Church, Piccadilly Street, and Trafalgar Park to King St James Street, and stopped in front of a hotel on King Street. Larry and Tocqueville got off the carriage, and Larry took out the silver coins that had been exchanged and handed them over to the coachman. May God bless you, two generous gentlemen. The coachman who took the silver coin left with a smile. The two entered the hotel together and checked in under the reception of the hotel owner. Tocqueville, whose luggage was placed in the hotel, ordered Lael to inquire about the Bonaparte family's residence. Lale left the hotel and inquired on King St James's Street alone. Tocqueville once again unpacked and carried out his works in the hotel. After more than an hour passed, Lael finally returned to the hotel. Mr. Tocqueville. The panting Lale swallowed and responded. I heard it. The place where Louis Napoleon is very close. Lael came to the window and pointed to a mansion in the distance. That's the Louis mansion. Chapter 46. Negotiations begin. Ever since he received the news from Huguenot from France, Jerome Bonaparte has been ready to meet the envoy of Tocqueville at any time. In order to understand the enemy, Jerome Bonaparte also went to the bookstore to buy a book on American democracy by Tocqueville. Although Tocqueville's book made Jerome Bonaparte feel uncomfortable, and even made Jerome Bonaparte have a kind of idea that Tocqueville is an, but Jerome Bonaparte still endured reading Tocqueville's books. And Ren, a proponent of Enron's thought in the late 20th century, during the period of neoliberalism in the United States. The idea is that the government should relax the regulation of enterprises, even without the need for a fully capitalist social system under the leadership of the government. Reagan was a famous proponent of Enronist ideas. During his neoliberal reforms, he abolished the US government's right to supervise and intervene in enterprises after Roosevelt. His Royal Highness, I have inquired into the hotel where Tocqueville is. Captain Letty, who was in charge of intelligence, reported to Jerome Bonaparte. Jerome Bonaparte put down the book in his hand, raised his head and asked, how did you find it? When I was patrolling, loitering, outside, I happened to meet a young man who asked me about you. Letty said to Jerome Bonaparte, did you tell him? Jerome Bonaparte asked rhetorically, of course not. Captain Letty immediately claimed credit. However, I followed the young man to a hotel. After a friendly exchange with the hotel owner told me the name of the passenger. Not bad. Jerome Bonaparte nodded in satisfaction, got up and patted Letty on the shoulder and encouraged, the empire needs talents like you. It is my duty to be loyal to the empire. Letty responded humbly to Jerome Bonaparte. After Jerome Bonaparte encouraged Letty again, he vaguely issued an expulsion order to Letty. Fleury was called over by Jerome Bonaparte. Mr. Fleury, I have an important task for you now. Jerome Bonaparte said to Fleury. Your will is my direction. Who are you going to tear apart? Fleury responded to Jerome Bonaparte with the iron-blooded style of a soldier. Jerome Bonaparte nodded with satisfaction and handed over the task of inviting Tocqueville to Fleury. Fleury, who was finally entrusted with the important task, excitedly saluted Jerome Bonaparte and promised to leave after completing the task. Your Highness, how could you entrust such an important task to him? Tyrann appears with a brass wash basin. Jerome Bonaparte took a steaming towel from the wash basin and wiped his cheeks. A rough man can make them relax their vigilance against me. Our enemies are not only emirs who want to use us as puppets, the Republic pies also. Taylor nodded understandingly. Half an hour later Fleury returned and informed Jerome Bonaparte that Tocqueville would be visiting the next day, May 14th. 1848 at 10 am. A brown carriage stopped in front of Louis Mansion, and Tocqueville and Lael got off. Jerome Bonaparte and members of the Bonaparte Party went down the steps to meet Tocqueville in person. Welcome, Jerome. Bonaparte and Tocqueville held hands. The two entered the Louis Mansion side by side. Please. Jerome Bonaparte stretched out his hand and made a gesture of invitation. Tocqueville was sitting on the sofa. Secretary Lallet was standing on Tocqueville's right hand, his eyes peeking at Jerome Bonaparte from time to time. Bonaparte Persony, as Jerome Bonaparte's secretary, also stood in Jerome Bonaparte's room. After all the main characters are seated, the confrontation officially begins. On behalf of the French Republic, I express regret for the death of Prince Louis Napoleon. Tocqueville showed a regretful expression, and his right hand turned to Lallet. Lael understandably opened the file bag and handed a piece of paper to Tocqueville. This is a private letter from Lamartine's ruling. Tocqueville handed the letter to Jerome Bonaparte. Jerome Bonaparte, who received the letter, glanced at Lamartine's private letter, which was probably regretting the death of Louis Napoleon. My cousin was always a Republican during his lifetime, so he prefers to be called a citizen of Louis Napoleon, rather than the Prince of old times. The title of Prince has long since become history. Now, you and I are both citizens. Jerome Bonaparte reminds Tocqueville wrote. Of course Tocqueville would not believe that Louis Napoleon, who wanted to restore the empire twice, was a Republican, but how many real Republicans are there in today's French politics? Okay. Citizen Jerome Bonaparte. Tocqueville said as he got off his donkey, I want my cousin to return to France as a Republican, as a rebel, not as a war criminal. The crimes of the Bourbon era should be abolished. Jerome Bonaparte offered to Tocqueville this historical issue. The Lamartine administration agreed to abolish it. Tocqueville decisively agreed to Jerome Bonaparte's conditions. Jerome Bonaparte looked at Tocqueville suspiciously. He did not believe that French politics had no strings attached. As Jerome Bonaparte expected, Tocqueville also made conditions. Tocqueville said carefully, the ruling Lamartine hopes that the Bonaparte family can give up this election. Impossible. Jerome Bonaparte objected like a bell. The Lamartine government has no right to deprive the Bonaparte family of the right to participate in elections. According to the Constitution of the French Republic, anyone who has reached the age of 18 and has settled in France for more than 2 years, the French can vote. Citizen. Jerome seems to know the French Constitution very well. Tocqueville looked at Jerome Bonaparte in surprise. If the Lamartine administration wants to deprive the Bonaparte family of their right to participate in politics, the Bonaparte family will definitely not agree. We will use everything we have to fight against the Lamartine administration. Jerome Bonaparte said decisively. Once this and only chance is lost, the Bonaparte family will never be able to return to French politics. Jerome Bonaparte would never allow such a thing to happen, even if he fought against the flourishing Republican faction. Chapter 47. Negotiated. Facing Jerome Bonaparte's tough attitude, that would not allow any compromise, Tocqueville was not surprised at all, but instead had a feeling that the Bonaparte family deserved. In his view, it is impossible for the Bonaparte family not to participate in politics. Even if the Lamartine administration personally issued a ban order, it would be difficult to implement it successfully. Unless it is called by the National Assembly, it is expressly stipulated that the Bonaparte family is not allowed to engage in any political affairs in France. For the Bonaparte family to deliberately convene a parliament and then set up a set of legal provisions, it is obviously a bit of a fuss. Even if the Bonaparte family does become the president of the French Republic, He still has to abide by the French constitution and regulations. The 4-year presidential resignation is also an inevitable situation. The Bonaparte family, under the shadow of the emperor, can only enjoy the treatment of the French ruler for a limited period of time, since the Bonaparte family is determined to participate in the French election. Of course Lamartine has no right to stop it. Tocqueville responded in a calm tone. The Bonaparte family is grateful for the understanding of Lamartine's ruling. Jerome Bonaparte did not lose the aggressive posture just now, and turned to reply in a soft voice. However, the government of Lamartine hopes that Mr. Jerome Bonaparte will not return to France in the next 2 months. Lamartine put forward the condition again. This condition is obviously much more generous than the previous condition. Jerome Bonaparte knew that in the coming month, the situation in France would continue to be in turmoil, and the battle between the two classes would tear the veil of the Republic's loveliness. If you stay in Paris, you might be tricked by a ruthless man like Cavaignac. At that time, all emperors will be buried by a bullet. Although Jerome Bonaparte couldn't wait to agree to Tocqueville's conditions, he still pretended to be reluctant. Mr. Tocqueville, Jerome Bonaparte said with a sincere hand, the French presidential election has begun. If he returns to France 2 months later, Bonaparte will be missing 2 months of preparation time. This is not an acceptable solution for me. This time Tocqueville showed a completely different toughness and said, the Bonaparte family must accept it. The Bonaparte family can accept it if Lamartine's administration insists on it, but I need a reason. Jerome Bonaparte asked with an unwilling heart stalking his neck. Seeing that Jerome Bonaparte reluctantly accepted the conditions, Tocqueville said in a soft tone, Mr. Jerome probably knows no less than us about the current situation in France. You mean the contradiction between the two classes? Jerome Bonaparte replied, pretending to be confused. Two classes? Tocqueville frowned subconsciously. It seemed that he didn't like the term. You're right, but I prefer to call it third class in fighting. Having said that, Tocqueville showed a melancholy expression. Come on. Jerome Bonaparte sneered at Tocqueville's conclusion. With a mocking expression at the corner of his mouth, he stretched out his hand in a weird tone and stroked in midair. Third degree. What an ancient term. Since after the establishment of the Republic, referring to the First Republic, the three-tier council has disappeared. The third tier, that united in the desire to gain power, has long been divided again, and those third tiers that have some rights have merged with the first and second tiers. Sans-culottes became the objects they abandoned. Mr. Tocqueville, is this infighting of the third class? This is class war. Jerome Bonaparte used the **** reality to tear apart the truth that Tocqueville was unwilling to admit. Mr. Jerome Tocqueville said with a slightly sad and angry tone, since you already know what might happen in France, then you should understand what your excellency in power means. The Bonaparte family has no interest in provoking the contradiction between the two classes. We always believe that the Republic can properly solve the problem between the two classes. Jerome Bonaparte, who was eager to see the blood in Paris, still pretended to be I'm thinking of the Republic. The face said sincerely. A trace of disdain flashed in Tocqueville's eyes. He did not believe that the Bonaparte family was really loyal to the Republic. Rather than having a pointless conversation with Jerome Bonaparte, it would be better to talk openly and openly. Tocqueville simply discarded his prepared remarks and went straight to the subject. Jerome Bonaparte. Mr. Bay, neither Lamartine nor I will believe the promise of the Bonaparte family. In 1837, the previous leader, Mr. Citizen Louis Napoleon, also promised before the court that he would not engage in any more actions to subvert the Bourbon dynasty. The Martin administration, Mr. Barrow, and you reading www.urkanshu.com, they are all defending the Louis citizens, and it has not been 2 years. Mr. Louis citizens landed in Calais again and engaged in the subversion of the Bourbon dynasty. You let us. How can you trust the guarantees of the Bonaparte family? Tocqueville bluntly pointed out that the case of the Bonaparte family leader's bad faith was embarrassing for Jerome Bonaparte, but he still bite the bullet for his cousin. We do this for the purpose of in order to overthrow the rule of the rotten Bourbon dynasty. It turns out that the French Republic was able to be successfully established because there were Republicans like cousins in the Bourbon dynasty. I don't think this is a shameful thing. Revolutionary trustworthiness is the greatest untrustworthiness. Tocqueville stared at Jerome Bonaparte like Columbus discovered the New World. This is the first time in his life that he has encountered such a brazen act of washing the floor, like a scoundrel with no bottom line. Tocqueville made an evaluation that was too correct to be correct. Since the Lamartine government does not trust the Bonaparte family, then we speak with actions. For 2 months, my feet will not step on French soil. The Bonapartists are also following the government's pace. Action. Jerome Bonaparte expressed his loyalty to the French government behind Tocqueville. However, I hope that the government can properly place the body of my cousin. At least not let a Republican chill. Of course, that's what I'm here for. Tocqueville said loudly. If possible, the corpse of citizen Louis Napoleon can return to France with us. Chapter 48. Departure to Rome. After negotiating the rules for the return of Louis Napoleon's body, Tocqueville was ready to leave for the hotel. Under the warm invitation of Jerome Bonaparte, Tocqueville and Lael stayed at the Louis mansion for a luncheon. During this period, Tocqueville introduced Lael's resume and background to Jerome Bonaparte. Lael humbly said that it was a great honor for him to study with Mr. Tocqueville. Jerome Bonaparte, who had learned about Lael's resume, raised his glass and asked half-jokingly, "Mr. Lalaurie wants to come to me. I guarantee you will get more pay than you did in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs." Lalaurie showed a flattered expression and also raised his glass. "Thank you, Mr. Prince, for your invitation. Please forgive me for refusing. The work in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs can better display my own talents. Mr. Prince's staff is full of talents, and I want to come. There is no shortage of people like me. That's such a pity." Jerome Bonaparte took a sip of wine with a lost expression. "If there is a chance, I will definitely help Mr. Prince's filial piety," Lael said proudly, drank the wine from the glass as the banquet drew to a close. Jerome Bonaparte asked when Tocqueville was leaving. Tocqueville, who lightly wiped the oil stains on the corners of his mouth with a handkerchief, said in a negotiating tone, "Mr. Prince, can we leave in the next 2 days? We are running out of time." Yes. Jerome Bonaparte was also afraid of the unpredictable winds in Paris. It would be better if his cousin's body could reach Paris as soon as possible. "Let's go tomorrow." Tocqueville looked at Jerome Bonaparte in astonishment. He did not expect that Prince Jerome Bonaparte would be so resolute in the matter of Prince Louis's body. Tocqueville, who originally planned to take a good tour of London, could only leave London with regret. "That couldn't be better," said Tocqueville. After having a full meal, Tocqueville and Lael left the Louis mansion. Jerome Bonaparte personally sent them down the steps and at the same time ordered Fleury, who was driving the carriage, to send them back to the hotel. Under Jerome's gracious rule, Tocqueville and Lael had no choice but to return to the hotel in a carriage. Jerome smiled and watched the carriage leave, turned around and returned to the mansion with a smile. Jerome Bonaparte, who was sitting on the sofa again, called Persigny over and ordered, "Persigny, tomorrow you will the corpse of your cousin with Tyrann and Fleury and return to France first. Remember to let the Bonapartists in France are welcome, and a proper display of our strength will make our rulers value us even more." Jerome Bonaparte meant to emphasize the word respect. Although Lamartine did not give Jerome Bonaparte harsh conditions, his domineering style still made Jerome Bonaparte unhappy. Right now was not the time for him to turn against Lamartine, so he could only keep it in his mind silently. "Your Highness, what are you going to do?" Persigny was a little worried about Jerome Bonaparte's safety in Britain. After all, this Mr. Prince took risks, in trouble, and was no better than the late His Majesty. "It's me." Jerome Bonaparte thought for a moment before making up his mind. "Since the French government will not allow me to enter the country in the near future, then I will go to Rome." After hearing this, Persigny's face changed greatly, and his tone became tough. "Your Highness, absolutely not. I definitely don't agree with you going to Rome alone." "Persigny, I'm not alone. After you leave, isn't there Letty? We are going to Rome together." Jerome Bonaparte tried to make Persigny no longer worry about his comfort. "His Royal Highness, I really don't understand why you are going to Rome. You should know that, since the riot in February, the whole region of Italy has been in turmoil. Bonaparte in danger, especially in a crisis-ridden region at this juncture. The Bonapartists could lose 2 leaders in just 1 year at that time. Where will they find the 3rd leader? They can't go to the United States to invite the line of Joseph who betrayed Bonaparte's mission. Pessiney, listen. Jerome Bonaparte said to Pessiney with a stern face, I did not go to Rome for pleasure, but to do an important thing. There's nothing you can't do after the riots are over. You only need to stay in London for 2 months. Pessiney persuaded Jerome Bonaparte hard. No. This must be done, and it may be related to whether I can become president. Jerome Bonaparte said decisively, please. Forgive me for asking your highness presumptuously, what is your plan? Pessiney asked Jerome Bonaparte. Pessiney, I ask you what kind of job is the majority of the French population? Jerome Bonaparte responded to Pessiney Riyad1.com peasants. Pessiney responded without hesitation, what is the greatest religion in France? Jerome Bonaparte asked again, Catholicism. Pessiney responded to Jerome Bonaparte again, that's right. Jerome Bonaparte nodded with satisfaction and replied, Catholicism affects the silent majority of France, and Rome affects the Catholicism of France, so I have to go to Rome to meet Pope Pius IX. But your highness, what His Majesty Napoleon did to the Pope? Pessiney expressed his concerns at that time. His Majesty Napoleon was invincible and imprisoned Pius VII in Savona Point. In Pessiney's view, the Holy See and the Bonaparte family have grown up. The joys and sorrows of human beings cannot be understood. Pius IX cannot feel the suffering of Pius VII, and his hostility to us will not be as perpetual as that of Pius VII. Jerome Bonaparte is confident, he said. Furthermore, Pius IX also needed a power to protect Rome. Now the whole of Italy is caught in a disease of nationalistic fanaticism, and the only way to curb the disease is the bayonet. Pius IX used to hope in Austria. Now Austria is deadlocked. They have to think about powers outside Austria. Jerome Bonaparte believed that in the face of fanatical nationalism, Pius IX would consider his attitude towards the Bonaparte family point compared with the fanatical Republicans and French Republicans. Bonaparte was obviously very pleasing to the eye point. As long as Pius IX in Rome has been dealt with, then it will be no problem to deal with the clerical faction in France. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 49. Leave Britain. In the face of Jerome Bonaparte's sufficient explanation, Pessiney knew that he could no longer stop the prince he was loyal to. The stubborn prince has made up his mind to go to Rome, and no words or difficulties can make him shrink back. Pessiney sighed and said, Your Highness, in principle, I do not approve of your going to Rome at this time. Since you insist on going to Rome, please be careful. The current papal state is not as stable as it used to be. It comes from France. Revolutionary frenzy has ignited the entire Apennine region. If His Majesty the Pope is not willing to reform like Sardinia, I'm afraid that the entire papal state will face an unprecedented disaster. Jerome Bonaparte nodded in agreement. He believed that the wheel of history will not deviate from the historical track with the replacement of the leader of the Bonaparte family. The 19th century chariot under the frenzy of nationalism is grinding its knives and crushing the papal state. The Roman Republic was established, and Pius IX fled. At that time, if I help Pius IX recover his country again as the savior of Christ and experience the life of displacement again, Pius IX will definitely forgive what the Bonaparte family did before. But before he can act as Christ the Redeemer, he must go to Rome to give Pope Pius IX the greatest confidence. In fact, Jerome Bonaparte did not go to Rome just to seek the Pope's support. Even if he supported his verbal praise, he shouldered the important task of correcting the thought of Pius IX. Before the establishment of the Roman Republic, Pope Pius IX was still a thoughtful and eager to reform the Pope. The Pope in this period, like the King of Sardinia, shouldered the hope of the entire Apennine Peninsula. However, after the March Revolution, the Pope's inaction disappointed many revolutionaries. The Pope and the revolutionaries gradually parted ways, and the conflict was revealed. After the establishment of the Roman Republic, and after Pius IX escaped from the papal state, his thinking became increasingly radical. When he returned to the papal state again, a pope willing to reform disappeared, and was replaced by a pope with conservative and radical ideas. The Pope and the Apennine masses were completely separated at that time, and the French garrison had to guard against radicals while stationed in Rome. What's worse is that the Pope's thoughts further affected the clerical factions in France, and the clerical factions that went to extremes became the bridgehead of the ultra-conservative forces, which undoubtedly gave a fatal blow to the Bonapartists, caught in the middle. In order to prevent history from repeating itself, Jerome Bonaparte must correct the Pope's extreme thoughts. After all, it is the responsibility of being a filial son of God to properly correct the Pope's mistakes. Don't worry. I believe in Captain Letter's ability and loyalty. Jerome Bonaparte patted Pessinny on the shoulder and said in relief, besides, the contradiction between the Papal States has not really erupted. When do you think they will break out? Pessinny asked curiously. It depends on when Venice and Lombardy are conquered by the Austrian Empire. Jerome Bonaparte responded without hesitation. In his memory, after the Italian coalition led by the Sardinian dynasty was repelled for the first time, the Papal State, which was unwilling to continue the war, drew back the vanguard troops it had originally dispatched. The strong national spirit made the revolutionaries want to continue the war, which naturally led to a conflict with the Pope. The revolution followed. Venice and Lombardy conquered? That's impossible. Pessinny asked suspiciously. I read in the newspaper that the Sardinian army had trapped the Austrian army. Now the Austrian Empire is planning negotiations. Negotiations are nothing but a bluff. Jerome Bonaparte said with a sneer. They are just using a multi-party approach to buy themselves time to deploy troops. Now Austria, the highest military leader of the empire in Lombardy and Venice, was the former chief of staff of the Allied forces, Radetzky, who expected that old fellow to compromise with the Sardinian dynasty. Unless my uncle is resurrected, huh? But I heard that the Austrian foreign ambassador has discussed. Pessinny still couldn't believe it. It was reasonable for the Austrian Empire to be soft, even if the war had reached this point. After all, the Hungarian and Czech Chaos parties in the Austrian Empire have involved a large part of Austria's energy. Pessinny, believe me, the government of the Austrian Empire has only fallen into a temporary schizophrenia. Once a strong man takes the stage, the Austrian Empire will soon return to normal. Jerome Bonaparte responded confidently. Strongman? Pessinny couldn't think of anyone else who could save the messy Austrian Empire from the quagmire. Jerome Bonaparte doesn't want to worry about the issue between Austria and Italy. Riyadh1.com. If we talk about it in detail, I'm afraid it will start from the Vienna Conference. Not only the Italian issue, but the whole turbulent 19th century issue needs to be started from that meeting. In short, as long as the Austrian Empire does not counter-offensive, Rome will not be in chaos. Once the Austrian Empire's counter-offensive starts, the suppressed conservatives and revolutionaries in Rome will clash. When that time comes, the revolution will follow. Gerard Tom Bonaparte summed it up. After Jerome Bonaparte's analysis, Pessinny finally had confidence in Jerome Bonaparte going to Rome, and out of prudence, he cautiously warned, Your Highness, you should be more careful. For good. I see. When I arrive in Rome, I will let Letty recruit a few guards. Jerome Bonaparte casually said. After speaking, the two walked upstairs together and entered the room where Louis Napoleon's body was kept. Looking at the embalmed Louis Napoleon, Jerome Bonaparte gave Pessinny an order to pack the box. Pessinny, who took the order, left the room. He was going to find a sliding coffin for Louis Napoleon's body. Jerome Bonaparte, who was alone in Louis Napoleon's mortuary, looked at his cousin with tears in his eyes and said briskly, Cousin, you can go easily. However, the Bonaparte families I will fight in the future. The Party of Order, the Republican Party, the Mountain Party, all of them are not fuel-efficient lamps. Leave all your brains to me. Jerome Bonaparte rambled on for more than 10 minutes, then closed his eyes and gestured with a standard Christian farewell etiquette and whispered, I hope you are in the spirit of heaven. Bless me, and at the same time, bless the Bonaparte family. Chapter 50, to Rome. May 16th. 1848 at 7 am. A priest in a white robe and holding a Bible appeared at the Louis mansion. Behind him were several strong men in linen coats. They were responsible for putting the remains of Louis Napoleon after the priest finished praying. The coffin was carried to the carriage outside the Louis mansion. Due to the urgency of time, the original cumbersome etiquette was all simplified, and everything was left to the side after Louis Napoleon stepped into the French land. The priest came to Louis Napoleon to read a prayer for Louis Napoleon. After the prayer was recited, Jerome Bonaparte, who was a family member, and Miss Howard, who was half a family member, looked at Louis Napoleon and the coffin affectionately before the coffin was closed. May the Lord bless our brother. He will be with the Lord. After the priest said a bunch of prayers again and again. The first phase of the funeral ceremony is over. The strong coffin carrying man who had been waiting for a long time put the sandalwood coffin on his shoulders and slowly walked down the stairs. Jerome Bonaparte and others followed the coffin carrying strong man downstairs. After the Catholic choir on the first floor saw the coffin slowly descending the stairs, they sang a farewell song arranged in Latin in unison. Several strong men carried the coffin onto the carriage, and the carriage moved slowly under the control of Fleury. Jerome Bonaparte, Pessigny, Terran, Letty, Tocqueville, Lael and others followed behind the carriage to prove it. The carriage arrived at the London dockyard from the East End at about 9 AM. With the help of several dockworkers, who paid for it, Louis Napoleon's coffin was sent to the cargo ship, which would carry Tocqueville and Bonaparte from the London dock to Calais. After the coffin arrived in Calais, the Bonnite element, headed by Eugen Rouet, and the Republican representative sent by Lamartine will meet. The estimated time to arrive in France is around May 20th. London docks. Jerome Bonaparte, who watched the coffin aboard the boat, took Tocqueville's hand and said, "Mr. Tocqueville, you have to worry about this journey." Having said that, Jerome Bonaparte set his eyes on Persigny and said, "Persigny, the body of my cousin will be handed over to you, and you must not cause trouble to Mr. Tocqueville." Persigny nodded in understanding. Tocqueville, who was unaware of Jerome Bonaparte's trip to Rome, also said politely, "Your Excellency, you must also take care of yourself in London. Leave the matter of Prince Louis to me. That's trouble." Jerome Bonaparte said sincerely. Tocqueville and Jerome Bonaparte parted in a reluctant atmosphere. Persigny boarded the ship with Tocqueville and others, and the cargo ship set off at 9:45 in the morning. On the deck, Persigny and Fleury waved their arms as they bid farewell to Jerome Bonaparte and Letty. Jerome Bonaparte also reached out to respond. The cargo ship drifted away and soon disappeared, and Jerome Bonaparte turned to leave the London pier. Captain Letty, who followed behind Jerome Bonaparte, asked in a low voice, "Your Highness, when will we leave for Rome?" "Let's go now," Jerome Bonaparte said without the slightest hesitation. Well, Letty was obviously taken aback by Jerome Bonaparte's resolute behavior. After a brief surprise, Letty asked cautiously, "Your Highness, should we wait 2 days to make some necessary plans, Captain?" "Letty." Jerome Bonaparte stopped and turned to look at Letty, who was gradually following, and said coldly, "Are you afraid, Captain?" Letty straightened his back and said unswervingly, "Your Highness, there is no word for fear in my dictionary. Your order is the meaning of my existence. I believe in your loyalty. Captain, I order you to go with me now." Jerome Bonaparte gave an order to Captain Letty. "Yes." Captain Letty obeyed Jerome Bonaparte's order. The two inquired all the way in the London docks, and finally got the news. A cargo ship from London to the port of Civitavecchia will depart at 3 PM. Under the negotiation of Jerome Bonaparte, the captain of the cargo ship was finally willing to take 2 people at a price of 15 gold per person, including accommodation and meals. Compared with the pre-revolutionary tickets, this fare is simply sky high. So much so that after Jerome Bonaparte negotiated the price with the captain, he jokingly complained, "Is the cargo ship made of gold or silver?" The captain also complained that the Apennine Peninsula is not very peaceful now, and he doesn't know if he can sell his goods. Under the warm invitation of the captain, Jerome Bonaparte and Letty boarded the ship. The cargo ship set off on time at 3 PM. Standing on the plywood and looking at the London dock, which was constantly rearing its legs, Jerome Bonaparte clenched his fists and muttered to himself, "London, I will be back. Next time, I will definitely come in another capacity." As for the finishing touches of the Bonaparte family in London, Jerome Bonaparte gave Miss Howard full authority. Reading www.canchu.com. When Jerome Bonaparte left the land of London with his 4-foot Albert, who was sitting in the study at Windsor Castle and processing important documents, received the information. You mean that fellow Jerome Bonaparte left London for Civitavecchia? Albert asked the Home Secretary in front of him with a surprised expression. That's right. The Home Secretary hurriedly explained. This is based on the information I got from the police follow-up investigation under my command. Why did he go to Civitavecchia? Albert pursed his lips slightly, his smooth and plump forehead creased with thought. This, of course, the Minister of the Interior, who only knew about Jerome Bonaparte, did not know the theme of Jerome Bonaparte. He could only guess and say, will he go to see the Pope? This possibility is not ruled out. Albert replied, but he was still a little puzzled. Why did he go to see the Pope? Isn't the relationship between his family and the Pope always bad? As the saying goes, if there is no investigation, there is no right to speak. The Home Secretary is silent. Albert, who couldn't think of what Jerome Bonaparte wanted to do, simply stopped thinking. As long as Jerome Bonaparte didn't touch the bottom line of the United Kingdom's interests, Albert didn't need to pay too much attention to him. Someone as strong as Napoleon ended up abdicating in the end. Let it all come naturally. Prince Albert thought silently in his heart. He then sternly criticized the Home Secretary for problems with the United Kingdom's police system. The Home Secretary promised that he would continue to revise the Police Act and strive to make fewer mistakes. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.